Just one
Student
is
Orbal, oh, one or
enough.
two, yeah, two. Student Orbaline would like to welcome you to Generating the Good Heart, the Importance of Love and Compassion, a Saturday workshop with Gustavo Cutz. But first, I would like to introduce Venerable Losam Dundrup.
Good morning, Gustavo. Welcome. So we just wanted to take a moment to welcome Gustavo back to the center. He did a wonderful series of teachings for us that you can find on our YouTube channel now. So we've invited him back to benefit our students. So he very kindly agreed. You can generally find Gustavo, as I said before, at Shantideva Center in New York. So if you want to connect with him, that's where you can generally find him. Although I hope you can generally find him here as well over the coming years. So just wanted to say, again, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Oh, no, thank you so much for asking me. Thank you so much for this opportunity for us to be together talking about compassion and love. Okay. Venerable, do you think would it be good for us to start with the prayers? Is there a way to, perfect. Thank you. So for anybody who feels comfortable with this, we can recite this together to help us generate a positive motivation for being here, starting with taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. We can say it in English. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, thank you. And so let's really just take a moment to think about what we're saying, that we're turning for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which means the deepest essence of our potential as it's been already realized in others and as it is to be realized in us. That's the ground that we're standing on. That's what we're relying on as our support for everything we're going to do. And our motivation for doing that is so that we can be a ground and a support for all beings to help them achieve happiness and end suffering. So that's why we do everything we do. And that's why we talk about love and compassion. So let me tell you guys what I was thinking. It was it's a pretty open-ended opportunity to talk about these very important things. So what I was thinking is that as we go through the day, I can share a little bit some thoughts about some of these topics, and we can also have some discussions and share other thoughts and questions and observations, objections, qualms, anything, so that we're kind of doing this together. And the way I thought that we could organize it is we could talk a little bit about the basis, very briefly, like the basis of love and compassion, and then why is this important to us? We can talk about some of the things that are related to love and compassion that we often might not know how to distinguish from love and compassion itself. And then we can talk about the way Buddhism categorizes the different types of love and compassion. before we then get into how do we develop love and compassion once it's clear to us what it is we're talking about, what it is we're not talking about, why do we care about it, and then how do we develop that. Okay, so I think the starting point is this. Perhaps, I don't know, I think maybe one could even make this argument that the single most fundamental thing in the Dharma is the fact that the nature of the mind is such that the mind always, always, always wants happiness and always, always, always wants not suffering. It wants to avoid suffering, escape suffering, stop suffering, diminish suffering, and it wants to find happiness, hold happiness, increase happiness, maximize happiness, and so on. What's interesting is that if you look at the definition of mind, of consciousness in Buddhism, this aspect isn't part of the definition as such, but this aspect it follows from the definition of mind. It's almost built into what the nature of mind itself is. This isn't something that ever increases or decreases. It doesn't increase or decrease when we become liberated, when we become enlightened, if we're selfish, if we're selfless. There is no altering this. It's like this desire for happiness and desire to avoid suffering is to the mind what wetness is to water. You know, you can't have dry water. You can't have mind that doesn't want happiness and wants to avoid suffering. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it's almost tautological. It's almost just a matter of the definition of happiness and suffering in themselves, right? Happiness is defined as a feeling such that when we don't have it, we want to experience it, or equivalently, a feeling such that when we have it, we want it to continue. Suffering is defined as a feeling such that when we have it, we want it to end, or such that when we don't have it, we want to avoid it. You know, so just from the very basis of that. It doesn't matter what species we are. It doesn't matter what realm we exist in. Again, if there's mind, then there's this. This is what in Buddhism we would call an innate quality of the mind. We wouldn't say inherent because that would mean something else in our vocabulary, but innate. If one exists, the other exists. If the other exists, the one exists. Let me actually stop there and ask you, what do you think about that? How does that sound? Please, yeah, just.
It's kind of like what I heard, the mind and its object arise simultaneously, and like two sides of the coin, kind of like you can't have a left side without a right side.
Yes, exactly. It's inseparable, right? It's two aspects, arguably of the same thing, right? Yeah, I like that. You can't have a left side without a right side. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. And this is something that I think we can almost deduce from first principles, but we can also just observe it all around us. If there's motivation, wherever there is some kind of motivating factor, it's related to happiness and suffering. Right now, it might be related to our own happiness and our own suffering, or it might be related to somebody else's happiness or somebody else's suffering, or both. But it always comes down to happiness and suffering. No being sentient beings or Buddhists differ in terms of that. We only differ in terms of what we believe will accomplish that end, and in terms of where we're drawing the boundary of where we care about, in terms of like, I care about suffering and happiness in here, but not out there, versus a wider boundary and stuff like that. We'll talk more about that. And compassion and loving kindness then, or compassion and love, I should say, are related to those two facts about this motivating power of the mind. Compassion is related to the desire for not suffering, and love is related to the desire for happiness, right? In fact, the definition of compassion, the way the word that we translate as compassion in English, the definition of that word is the wish for suffering to end for others, the wish for others not to suffer, to have less suffering. Love is defined as the wish for others to have more happiness, right? The wish for happiness for others. So if we're thinking about our own happiness or our own suffering, we wouldn't use these terms. But the moment we start thinking about the happiness and suffering of others, that's where these terms would come in, right? And yeah, I think let me leave it there. So there is this underlying basis that is fundamental to the mind itself, that is already related to love and compassion. This is something, it's not something that you have to build on the basis of some philosophy or some philosophical understanding or some worldview or something like that. This is very intimately related to the very essence of being a sentient being, being a conscious being. Where we make things complicated without meaning to, is that when it comes to ourselves, there is no exception to this. Like when it comes to like thinking about ourselves, we always want to maximize happiness. We always want to minimize suffering. But when it comes to thinking about others, then some things can kind of go awry, you know? When we see things clearly, as I hope we'll see by the end, when we see things clearly, then when we look at others, we want to maximize happiness, we want to minimize suffering in the same way. But when there's something kind of shrouding our view, when there's something kind of make us see things in a foggy way, then sometimes we might think that we actually want suffering for others, or that we don't want happiness for others, or that we're indifferent, right? Emotionally, we might feel those things, but it's due to a distortion. And again, we'll talk about that. But let me ask this: what do you guys think about this claim that I'm making, that everybody, without any exception, without even a momentary exception, everybody wants to maximize their own happiness, wants to minimize their own suffering? Can anybody think of an exception to that? Or something that seems like an exception?
I can't think of anything, anyone or any being.
Sometimes people say, yeah.
I think about like those people that do, I'm guilty of this as well, but like the self-sabotage. But like even in that aspect, it's like I'm still trying to be happy. I just don't quite understand the path to the happiness. So I'm like self-sabotage.
Right, exactly. That's exactly how I see it too. Just make sure. Sorry, it's a little chilly. See that right there. I want less suffering, right? So I did something. Yeah, people sometimes talk about masochists, right? That's often a counterexample that people give, like, don't masochists like pain? Don't masochists like suffering, right? And one thing is that there's a difference between pain and suffering, for one thing. It's just in terms of physical sensations. Somebody could the same physical sensation could be experienced with suffering, neutral, happiness. So that's one thing. Another thing is that even if we leave aside the question of masochists, which is going to be the same thing, but I think sometimes we ourselves might notice, even if we're not masochists, we might notice that sometimes we're angry with ourselves, sometimes we feel guilt and we feel angry with ourselves, and we might kind of have this wish that something bad might happen to us, like we deserve it or something like that. But even then, if I say to myself, I want something bad to happen to me, like I want something bad to happen to me, I will be upset if it doesn't. I will be frustrated if it doesn't. Right? It's like there's an old joke that says, if a masochist and a sadist meet up, the masochist will say, hurt me, and the sadist will say, no. Right? There's still, there's two types of suffering involved, perhaps, and we're always motivated to go with the one that feels lesser to us, that appears in our mind that it will be the lesser one. Like I'd rather be yelled at than live with this guilt. That's where that's coming from. If I want somebody to yell at me, I'd rather suffer some consequence than feel like I'm getting away with something, because otherwise it's uncomfortable, otherwise it's unpleasant, right? So it always comes down to wanting to minimize suffering, wanting to maximize happiness. So then again, the question really comes down to, well, let me say this, wanting to maximize happiness, wanting to minimize suffering, that is built into the mind. What is not built into the mind is the question of where. I want to maximize happiness where, I want to minimize suffering where, right? And the default is to say, I want to maximize happiness and minimize suffering within this circle, within the people that are within this circle right here, right? And then for human beings, we're lucky enough that the default for us is a slightly wider circle that also includes some people in our lives, typically it might include like our close family members. We might also include people who have been kind to us, have been helpful to us, and so on. And so we, perhaps in a way that most of the time perhaps a lizard might not, we as humans, it's just in our biology that kind of automatically our circle is a little bit wider in this lifetime, right? But it's still limited. It's still limited. What happens outside of that circle is anybody's guess. Like what are my wishes for people who are outside of the circle? That's anybody's guess. There are going to be some people that I'm going to like see their suffering, and my circle is going to get like extended in their direction a little bit. I'm going to feel the wish for them to not have suffering. I'm going to feel the wish for them to have happiness. Also, there are going to be some people that I'm going to see outside of my circle that I'm going to think are obstacles to my happiness, obstacles to my freedom from suffering. And so I'm going to feel anger towards them. I'm going to wish bad things to happen to them. And there are going to be the overwhelming majority of people that I don't really know anything about. And so it just doesn't cross my mind to wish for their happiness or their non-suffering, and just, I've never met them, I don't know them, I haven't heard about them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? That's where those distinctions start to come in. And so when we talk about wanting to increase love and wanting to increase compassion, what we're talking about is wanting to increase the size of that circle, the size of the circle of people that are within what I actually care about, right? With one more nuance, which is that even among my loved ones, even among my family, there can be a little bit of wavering, of how much love and compassion I feel for them at any given moment. For ourselves, it's invariable. Like we never have any less love for ourselves, any less compassion for ourselves, if we wanted to put the words that way. But for anybody else, it as long as we're ordinary beings, then it's variable. And that's because of the conditions that we're considering when we're drawing that line. How do we decide where to draw the line? Usually we draw the line based on how much the other person is benefiting me or how much the other person is hurting me. So if somebody if somebody that I typically love says something really hurtful, I might temporarily draw the line a little bit closer to myself and like exclude them. You guys get what I'm saying, like with this metaphor of drawing a circle and all of that? Okay. So what we want to do is by increasing love and compassion, we want to kind of decide where we're drawing that line on a more solid basis, on a more objective basis, perhaps. In fact, I'll tell you what, there was something that I was thinking that I would talk about last of all, but I think it might actually be helpful for me to talk about it here. So I'm going to actually bring in what I thought was like the most advanced thing I wanted to talk about, because I think it's actually also the most fundamental. And that's this. Ready? What is the relationship between love and compassion on the one hand and emptiness of inherent existence on the other hand? Right? We're going to talk about this before lunch, by golly. Because this I think ultimately is the explanation of this whole business, of this whole thing. So let's think about this. The Buddha said that there are, countless phenomena playing themselves out in the universe, countless processes playing themselves out in the universe. And that some of these phenomena, some of the mental phenomena, they create a concept that draws a circle around some group of phenomena and says that is one thing and that is called me. See what I'm saying? So, there is a circulatory system, there's blood, there's a heart, there's a brain, there's kidneys, there's hair, there are fingernails, there is sadness, there is happiness, there is compassion, there is anger, there is a desire to have lunch, there is a memory of having been in Brazil, and there is a thought that says all of the things I just listed are one thing, and they're called Gus, right? So however many things I listed, that's how many things there are. We could say more or less. But one of those things happens to be a thought that says all of these things are one thing, and it's called Gus. And that's just a made up thing. That's just a made up thought. Don't believe everything you think. Feelings are not facts, right? It's a made up thought. But we all have it until we're liberated. We all have it. And once more, the Buddha said, that is the cause of suffering. That is why suffering exists. Wherever that thought exists, there will be suffering associated with it. Wherever that thought doesn't exist, there cannot be suffering. And what's interesting is that we could ask, like, what is the basis? Like, how does that thought decide which phenomena to count as me and which phenomena not to count as me, right? How does that thought decide that? And it's a very interesting question, But when you start to investigate it really, like when you start to investigate it very truthfully, you find that there is no answer, there is no basis. There isn't anything that distinguishes. Like there isn't anything that the phenomena that I call me have in common that isn't shared by any of the phenomena that I don't call me. You know, there is no single common factor. The only common factor is that it is included among the phenomena that I call me, right? It would be like if I said, you know, here's a book and here's a case for the AirPods, and here's a cell phone, and here's an iPad, if I can hold all of this up. Okay. There are 4 things here, right? Now I could make up a story that says that the cell phone and the book together, right, are called a shmoobie, right? Okay, so now I've made up a story. The cell phone and the book together are called a shmoobie. The rest of the things are independent of that. So now I'd say, okay, there are 3 things here. There's an iPad, there's a case, and there's a shmoobie, right? Well, how did you decide, Gus? I mean, we can play the game, we can go along with it, and we can understand each other. And I could say, like, can you see the shmoobie now? And then you'll say yes. And then I'll say, can you see the shmoobie now? And you'll say no, right? Because once you understand the game, you can play it. But then you can ask, well, Gus, how did you decide which of the things are called shmoobie and which of the things are not? Which of the things are part of the shmoobie and which of the things are not, right? And if you could like look through every atom of this book and every atom of the cell phone to see what is it that they have in common that make them a shmoobie, that the other things don't have in common that make them a non-shmoobie, and you won't find anything because I just made it up. I pulled it right out of a hat, right? And the self is like that. The I, you know, that which is Gus compared as opposed to the everything else that is not Gus is like that. We can play the game. Once we understand the idea, we can play the game. And if somebody says, was Gus there on Saturday? You can say yes. And if you say, was Gus there on Sunday? You can say no, right? But then if somebody says, oh, like, okay, so how did we decide what counts as Gus again? Like, where did we, like, what is it that all of the phenomena that we're saying are Gus have in common that all of the phenomena that aren't Gus don't have? Nothing, just nothing, nothing. But it doesn't feel that way. It does not feel that way. For the shmoobie, it feels that way. For the shmoobie, we can easily tell, which is why I used it as an example, because we can easily tell that there's nothing going on here. It's all coming from the mind, right? It's all just a game, right? But for Gus, even for you guys who aren't Gus, for Gus, it feels different. It feels like there is a fact of the matter there, you know? And certainly for all of us, when it comes to me, in my case, it's the same, Gus and me. But, you know, for any one of us, when it comes to me, Lord help us, it's very different. You know, somebody sticking a pin into me seems very different from somebody sticking a pin into Odnar, you know? And there seems to be a fact of the matter about what counts as me and what doesn't. Make no mistake, just to be clear, it's perfectly fine as a convention, you know, as an agreement to say, okay, let's count these. Like if it's happening to one of these things, let's go ahead and say that it's happening to me. If it's happening to another thing, then let's say it's not happening to me. Everybody on board? Yes, yes. Okay, ready, go. You know, fine. It's like a language game. It's how words work, right? All we're saying is that there's nothing else behind that. There's nothing else but that. It's a free decision to establish a free convention, right? And if you understand that, then you're pretty smart, because that it's very counterintuitive. But the more you look at it, the more you realize that it's undeniable. It's unquestionable when you really look at it. It couldn't be any other way. Well, the thing is, if, like, again, as of right now, it's very clear to all of us that the shmubi is just a made-up thing, right? But, you know, like there's nothing that sets it apart from this guy here, right? But if we kept playing this game day in and day out, hour after hour after hour, year after year after year, eventually it would start to feel a lot more intuitive. Like we would start to almost, not visually, literally, but intellectually see the shmubi as a single thing. We would think of the shmubi as a single thing, you know? And we would almost forget that we made it up. That's how it happens, like when we name a baby. In the beginning, I think we're keenly aware that the name is just a made-up thing for the baby, right? There's not really a connection. We just kind of chose it and we just made it up. But over time, day in and day out, using that name to refer to that being, we forget. And it seems like the name comes from the side of the baby, you know? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Or I sometimes, I remember like in college thinking about The Simpsons. How, I don't know if you guys have ever seen The Simpsons, but it's so ubiquitous that I think most people in the United States would probably just recognize them if they saw them, right? And like, think about, I don't know if you can relate to this, but I remember thinking about, it's like, it used to be when you first see The Simpsons, those drawings, I mean, let's even go ahead and say those people, right? They're fictional people, but those people, they have no connection to each other in your eyes, right? They're just random people. You don't know who is who, what is what. Like you go like, is that spiky hair thing? Is that the little girl? Is that the daughter? Or is that the friend? You know, like, and so if you see like, I don't know, like Mo from The Simpsons standing next to Marge, you might be like, okay, that's the couple, right? And somebody say, no, that's Mo, that's the bartender. Well, if you watch The Simpsons for long enough, there comes a time when you see the 5 characters in the family as a single unit, I think. Like you see them as The Simpsons, you know? You don't say, oh, that guy and that woman did such and such. Oh, the Marge and Homer, like The Simpsons are blah, 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 right? If you see Marge standing next to Mo and somebody says, who are those? You say, oh, that's Marge and that's Mo. But if you see Marge and Homer and Lisa and Bart and Maggie, you'll say, oh, those are The Simpsons, right? Habit, it's just habit. It's just habit. But our minds really conceptualize it that way, clumps them together as one thing. Now, if we habituate ourselves enough to that, thus saith the Buddhist tenets, eventually, over the course of lifetimes, we'll get to a point where visually the thing will appear to us as one. Right? It will appear to our senses directly as one through sheer habit. Through sheer habit. That might sound far-fetched, but it's not that far-fetched. It happens all the time, even within one lifetime when it comes to language. If you're learning a new language, or if you're starting to become familiar, or even if you don't know a language, and you hear people speaking fluidly in that language, right? All you hear is a series of disconnected sounds. There's no sense of where one word begins and another word ends, right? Do any of you speak Portuguese by any chance? Perfect. Se eu começar a falar em português, vocês não vão entender absolutamente nada. Vocês não vão ver onde começa uma palavra e onde acaba a outra, right? You couldn't, even if you don't, you could say, okay, I don't, like, imagine if I said, like, I know you don't know what I said, but tell me where did each word begin and end? You'd have no idea. You know, you don't know if it's onde acaba outra, or whether it's on Jaka baotra, like you don't know, right? It's none of those, by the way. However, once we become fluent in a language, it's very clear to us where one word ends and the next begins. It's very clear to us where one word ends and the next begins, right? Not begins, but begins, right? To the point that we hear them as separate things. In actuality, acoustically, they're not. Acoustically, there's no way to, like, nobody, like, you know, nobody with a perfect recording device could deduce where one word ends and the next begins in the language they don't know. It's impossible. There is no distinction. But through habit, through familiarization and habit, we hear them as if they were separate pieces. Fair? That's how the self exists. The self is like a series of sounds in this fluid set of sounds that we hear as one word, right? The self is a set of phenomena in this infinite set, in this infinite world of phenomena that we experience as one thing through sheer habit. It is the most long-standing habit we have, arguably. I mean, technically, I guess we couldn't really say that, but it's beginningless, so none is older. And the way that, you know, so what happens, not literally chronologically, because all of this is since beginningless time, so there wasn't one thing that happened first, but conceptually, the order, the logical order that it happens is this. First, we establish a convention of, okay, let's draw a circle here, and let's call the things within that circle self. Let's call the things outside that circle other. Let's just do that. Then we forget, as it were, that we made that up, and we start to believe that it's true. And then we actually experience it as if that were what's going on, right? We actually directly have the direct experience of a single unitary self separate from everything else. It's not an intellectual thing, it's a direct experience, right? Distorted experience, optical illusion, as it were, right? That's the order in which it happens. But still, the first, like, you know, conceptually, the first, like, logical step is to make up a boundary, which we do freely. Now, where we draw that boundary, there are certain feelings included within that boundary, inevitably, right? Certain happinesses and certain unhappinesses are included inside that circle, right? And the person who's doing the caring or not doing the care, like the phenomena that care or don't care about things, are also within that same circle. And so what happens is that when that circle is very solid, when that circle is very fixed, then naturally the part that cares only cares about the happiness, the part that cares about happiness and suffering only cares about the happiness and suffering inside that circle. That's what selfishness is. The mind makes it seem as if there is a very sharp distinction between self and others. Like there's a gulf between self and others. They're as if they're two categorically different type of thing, you know? And happiness and suffering are experienced inside that circle. It's experienced within the self, right? And so that's the happiness and suffering that the mind latches onto and cares about. The happiness and suffering of what the mind calls me. You can see this is only points out that you can see this process kind of playing itself out if you're at a store and you notice a beautiful object, and then somehow the object kind of falls and breaks in the way you feel, versus if you buy the object and the object then falls and breaks and how you feel, right? He says, it's even interesting to notice, he says, what happens when you pick up the object and you decide, okay, I'm going to buy this, and then it falls and breaks. Already, right? There's a sense of this is within the me circle somehow. I care in a way that I didn't really care in the same way otherwise, right? Any thoughts or questions about this? Please.
I was going to say, so then is emptiness the destruction of that circle?
Great question.
So that the knower and the object become one and the circle is gone forever?
Fantastic question. Fantastic question. The answer might surprise you. The answer is no. Emptiness is, well, the recognition of emptiness is the recognition of what established that circle in the first place. It's merely the recognition that that circle was something made up. The circle exists, but it's made up. The circle exists like the prime meridian exists. You know, we all agreed, let there be a prime meridian, or let there be an international date line, you know, let it be located in this spot and not that spot, right? Like the prime meridian, I think, goes through the observatory at Greenwich in the UK, if I'm not mistaken. Why? Because whoever thought of it first said that, you know, and they probably lived in Greenwich, you know? And so we're like, okay, fine. And so now it is, you know, like that's the convention. But what would happen is if we interacted with it enough, if we thought about it enough, then it would almost start to appear to us as if the prime meridian is something that always existed on the ground before, like, and somebody discovered it, you know? So emptiness there would be realizing that that's not true, that there's nothing on the ground. That's not how it exists. That's not what establishes it. It's something created by the mind and agreed to as a convention. It does exist, but in that way, right? If you were to come to a conclusion that, oh my gosh, there is no prime meridian, and then if somebody said, oh, excuse me, I'm trying to find Greenwich, which way is the prime meridian? And you said, there is no prime meridian, you'd be misled. You'd be mistaken. There is. And if you're like near Greenwich and somebody says, which way to the prime meridian? Like, if you know, you can point and say, oh, it's that way. And you'll be telling the truth, right? The question that emptiness addresses is, well, what establishes it? Like, what makes it so? Is it something from its own side? Is it something on the ground that we discovered? Or is it something that we're just kind of making up and agreeing to? Other example, if you're playing Monopoly, when you pass go, you collect $200, right? So if you're playing Monopoly and you pass go and you collect $300, you cheated. And if you pass go and you collect $100, you made a mistake. That's really true. That's really true. There's no doubt of that. Now, the question could come, well, why is it that we're supposed to collect $200? How did Milton Bradley discover that? What experiments were conducted in the Milton Bradley laboratories? And the answer is no. That's just something that they made up. And then we just all agreed to play along. Now that we're agreeing to play along, that's the rule of the game, you know? But mind you, we're free to make up our own house rules as long as everybody playing agrees. You know, if I'm sitting around the table with some erstwhile friends, people don't stay friends very long after Monopoly in my experience, but if I'm sitting around a table with people I don't want to be friends with anymore, and we're about to play Monopoly, I could say, all right, guys, how about this? You guys want to play this time? You're going to change it up so that when anybody passes go, you collect $500. Yeah, up the ante a little bit. I don't know if that would even make it, but yeah, everybody cool. Okay, so ready? So tonight when you pass go, collect $500, right? Right. Well, then when you pass go and you collect 500, now you're not cheating. That's the rule now, right? And the question could be asked, well, how do you know? How did you find out that tonight was supposed to be $500? And it didn't find out. We made it up and we all just agreed to it. But now that we've agreed to it, that's what it is. And then if somebody could say, this is interesting, somebody could say, no, you're playing it wrong. That's not the way you're supposed to do it. That person isn't understanding something. The thing they're not understanding is the emptiness of inherent existence of the $200 rule. That, by the way, is not even an analogy. That is a literal statement. The person said, if we all agree to collect 500 when you pass go, and somebody says, I don't care that you all agreed, you're doing it wrong. That's not the rule. The problem with that person in that moment is that they are failing to recognize the emptiness of inherent existence of the $200 rule. Because if you realize it, then you can realize easily, uncontroversially, that as long as everybody agrees to do it differently, that's just as valid. Now, somebody else could argue, oh, one thing is that according to this $500 rule, the mechanics of the game won't be as much fun. That's an empirical question. Maybe that's true, but it's not less valid. You're not breaking a law. You're not breaking, you're not denying reality. Now, this is important because when we talk about the self, this is very crucial, that we don't want to think that we're trying to realize that the distinction between self and others doesn't exist. It absolutely exists in the same way that the $200 rule exists in Monopoly, in the same way that the prime meridian exists in Greenwich, in the same way. If I steal some cookies and somebody says, did you steal the cookies? And I think to myself, there is no me. So no, then I lied. That is a lie. Right? The question isn't about is it or isn't it? The question is about what establishes it, Because what creates our suffering isn't that we believe that we exist. We do exist. What creates our suffering is that we believe that what establishes our existence is something other than it is. It's amazing because you might think like, well, that sounds so philosophical. I mean, if I exist, who cares how, who cares what establishes it? It sounds, but when you really look at it, when you understand it, when you look at the 12 links of dependent arising, you see that every suffering there could possibly be necessarily stems from that misunderstanding. We don't even know, it's kind of like there are all these things that our minds do that we don't realize that our minds are doing, like all these things, simple things. Like, for example, one cat, two cats, one dog, two dogs, right? One is S, one is Z, right? One bike, two bikes. One bag, two bags, right? Now here's a new one. One Borogov, two. Try it out for yourself, right? Is it an S or a Z? Every native English speaker will say it's a Z. Or at least it will come out, like whether they say it or not, it will come out as a Z, two Borogovs. Nobody will say two Borogovs, right? One Fef, two Fefs, not two Fefs, right? There's a pattern, there's a rule. We all learn it, we all follow it, but we have no idea that we are, right? So in the same way, there's a rule that we've all internalized that we follow about what is it that establishes the existence of the self that we don't even realize is a thing. We don't. So incidentally, by the way, just because this actually, I think, relevant to this in a roundabout way, the rule that the way we know whether it's fefs or fefs has to do with what is the last sound in the word that we're pluralizing before the S, and is that a voiced sound or an unvoiced sound? If it's a voiced sound, it comes out as z. If it's an unvoiced sound, it comes out as s. Most of us have no freaking clue what a voiced sound or an unvoiced sound even is. You know, we have no idea. And yet we all do it. We all follow it. And it affects our speech. It affects our actions, right? If somebody doesn't do it, we don't have no idea why, but we can tell that they have an accent, right? In a similar way, none of us has the slightest idea what inherent existence means, you know, but we're all doing it. We're all assuming it. We're all behaving accordingly. And that affects everything. And unlike the S and Z thing, which don't matter, the inherent existence one, that is the cause of all our suffering. Now, lest I be accused of claiming to talk about love and compassion, but instead hijacking the whole thing and talking about emptiness instead, let me tell you why I thought that this was an important thing to say early on. The absence of compassion, the absence of love, they are premised on a mistake. Not like a mistake of kindness, a mistake of goodness, a mistake of value, a mistake of understanding, right? They are premised on the mistake that the circle that exists between me and other is established inherently from its own side. That there is a legit distinction, that some things are me and some things are other, you know, and that happiness and suffering exist within me, right? And so that's the realm that I need to care about the happiness and suffering of. That is an error. It's as if we based our decisions on seeing a mirage and thinking there's water there. Everything we do from that basis is going to be a mistake, you know? And the same way we have the mirage of a boundary between self and other, and we act on the basis of that mistake, and that's where we get self-cherishing, right? Selfishness, self-centeredness, lack of compassion, lack of loving kindness, as well as other things like anger, attachment, like all the horrors of the universe, right? All of that comes from this mistaken acceptance of a mistaken perception of a boundary between self and other. When we see that that boundary is just pure convention, you know, it's just a convention for the sake of communication, for the sake of language almost, then it doesn't really matter, like the importance that we were putting on it. The line is still there as a conventional thing, but the importance that we attach to the line, that's gone out the window. Like going back to the monopoly thing, if somebody believes in the inherent existence of the $200 rule, they'll be afflicted the whole night as people are playing by the $500 thing. All night they'll be sitting with this feeling of like, but this is wrong, this isn't it, you know, it's $200, not $500. But if they realize the emptiness of inherent existence of that rule, that importance will disappear. It's impossible to simultaneously realize that that's just a made-up thing that anybody can agree to, whatever, and simultaneously think, but it's wrong, right? In the same way, it's impossible to realize self versus other, that's just a language thing, basically, kind of. But it matters. You can't. One is the, well, the reverse of the other, ultimately. Any thoughts about this? Okay. Well, so another way we can say this is that love and compassion, they're aligned with reality in a way that selfishness is not. You know, selfishness requires a misunderstanding, a misapprehension, a mistake. Whereas love and compassion don't. From that perspective, this is fascinating and beautiful and so, it's like the gospel of Buddhism. It's like the good news, right? From that perspective, it makes sense to say that the nature of the mind is inclined toward compassion and love, as opposed to being inclined towards selfishness. Selfishness can only ever be a temporary thing that abides for as long as ignorance abides, for as long as misapprehension abides. But when misapprehension is gone, love and compassion are forever. It's impossible for them to go away, because the nature of the mind is to want happiness, not want suffering. So if we don't have a circle that we're drawing and holding on to, then we'll just want happiness everywhere and non-suffering everywhere. We won't make a distinction between yes, here, there, I don't care. The only distinction we can draw is based on adding an importance to a boundary. And that importance is based on a misunderstanding. We do this stuff all the time, by the way, on all levels. You know, like think about all the emotions that often come up for people when they have a birthday where they're turning something that ends with 0, right? It feels like something happened that didn't happen last year and didn't happen yesterday and isn't happening tomorrow, right? It's complete BS, guys. It's complete BS. Like if you think about all of the levels of abstraction and convention, for one thing, if you were Chinese or Tibetan, you'd be 1 year older than you are already to begin with. And then your age would change on New Year, not on your birthday in Tibet. So you can only say that you've turned a decade older at best within the Western calendar, right? Which is completely arbitrary. It's like if you lived somewhere else, you wouldn't have just turned that decade older, you know? Then you have to consider the whole thing about leap days. So like, you know, like what if you're born on February 29th? Then when do you turn that date that ends with 0? Oh, well, it's like this or it's like that. But I wasn't born of it. But yes, but are you counting the 29th as adding a day, or are you not counting? Are you going by the Gregorian calendar? And then on top of that, the length of the years, well, certainly I know the length of the days change. When they built the Three Gorges Dam in China, there was such a displacement of water that the day became a tiny fraction of a second longer on planet Earth, you know? So maybe you're not even getting the timing right. Maybe you've already been 50, you know? Plus, the whole thing is just based on a concept of chronological age that has nothing to do with biological age. And it depends on which side of the international date line you were born on, whether it was standard time or daylight savings time. And yet, for all of that, when midnight strikes, we feel like, I am 50, I am 70, I am 30, you know? When you truly realize that is just all made up, like, yes, on your tax form, I know you don't put your age on your tax form. What am I saying? Like on your driver's license or whatever, wherever you might need to write down your age. Yes. Oh, it's after midnight and I'm in this time zone. Yes. Okay. I am 50, you know? Oh, it's after midnight, but I'm in another time zone. No, I am 49, you know? Yes. But that's just because somebody made something up and we all just kind of agreed to play along by those rules. Nothing actually happened, right? Then you can't worry emotionally that way. So you'd be free of that type of suffering at least. But that's very limited. Realizing the emptiness of inherent existence of that is very limited in a way that realizing the emptiness of inherent existence of the self is not, because everything goes through the belief in the inherent self. But so in the same way that if we realize that this is all made up based on a system of, you know, chronological convention, in the same way that then we couldn't feel all of that anxiety, in the same way that if we realize the emptiness of inherent existence of the $200 rule in Monopoly, then we couldn't feel that discomfort with people playing according to different rules. In the same way, if we realize the emptiness of inherent existence of the boundary between self and other, then we couldn't possibly have anything other than love or compassion. And because that that lack of inherent existence is the truth, then love and compassion fit with the truth in a way that selfishness doesn't. And what's more, all of our suffering, all of it, comes from holding tight to this sense of self versus other. And so every time we act on the basis of that sense, of that belief, we're reinforcing it. We're kind of reinforcing that belief, or reinforcing that sense, you know? Just like with any behavior, you know, like anytime we act on the basis of something, we're reinforcing that sense. Like anytime we act as if we were not valid people, we're going to reinforce our sense of not being valid people, right? Yeah, just anything. And so acting with selfishness just reinforces the causes of our suffering more and more and more. We feel more and more like what matters begins and ends within here, you know? I have to look out for number one. You know, there's a sense of isolation, there's a sense of competition, like I need to get the thing first before they get it, you know? There's only one seat on the bus. Can I be faster than this other person? Right? There's this more and more, it's like the walls closing in on like, this is the self, this is where it begins and ends, and that's where all suffering exists. Whereas the more we're acting from a place of love and compassion, the more we're behaving according to those, the more we're reinforcing that sense of spaciousness, that sense of no boundaries beyond the conventionalities, you know, that sense of, to put it this way, like we're all in this together, you know. And then the more spaciousness, freedom from anxiety, freedom from depression, freedom from all the negative emotions, the more and more we have of that. And the more opportunity we have for happiness, because if I'm thinking from a selfish place and the other person gets the seat on the bus before I do, then the one that mattered didn't get the seat on the bus. And so it's disappointing, it's frustrating, it's angering, it's this, and that. Whereas if I'm approaching it from a place of love and compassion, and the other person gets the seat on the bus before I do, then it's fine. Somebody needed a seat and somebody got a seat. What difference does it make if it was person A or person B? You know? So there's peace, and we can even rejoice. We can even be, oh, I'm so glad they were tired. I'm so glad they got a seat. You know, right now, like, to think that might just feel like words, but it can feel like a very genuine thing when we've reinforced love and compassion, when we've reinforced not seeing things as if there were this solid boundary that exists from its own side. Thoughts, questions, comments at this point? Yes, please.
I'm hard to put into words, but like this idea of the convention and the rules and how life is supposed to be is like I guess triggering thoughts in my head about like the love and compassion, because like certain people see my family and they're like, oh my gosh, your family has no love, no compassion. Other people see my family and they're like, oh yeah, they're loving, they're compassionate. So it's like that's a concept, like a convention that we've agreed on what a family dynamics is supposed to look like. But if you keep picking apart all of the conventions, everything that we've agreed upon, everything that, you know, TV has, society has showed us what a family is supposed to be, there's still this feeling that I guess can only be labeled as love. But it's so tricky, this convention thing, like how we have to still kind of hold to it but see through it at the same time.
Yeah, I think that last thing you said, I think that's the key. Sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, it's no, I think I'm still kind of piecing things together, but yeah, this is awesome. I just wanted to share that, yeah, because like everybody has their own concept or idea of what love and compassion is supposed to look like. Like even your example of on the bus. Like some people would be like, oh, well, it's self-love to, you know, tell that homeless person to stand while you sit because you work. And I'm like, no, because they're homeless, you know, like, what does it matter? You know, so it's tricky. This is tricky work we're doing. Thank
Oh,
you.
yes. Oh, no, of course. Thank you. Yeah. No, I think you nailed it. I think it's about understanding the conventions and using the conventions, not just for the sake of others, but because we need to, but being clear on what they are and what they're not. That's all, you know? So if somebody were to say, is your family compassionate? Then probably the best answer might be mind your own business. The second best answer might be, what do you mean by compassionate? And then whatever they say, answer in those terms. That's what they're actually asking, right? That's kind of a little bit like recognizing the emptiness of inherent existence of the meaning of the word compassionate. You know, it's there's, we can't, like, if the person says, oh, by compassionate I mean whatever they might say, by compassionate I mean going fishing every Sunday. We can't really say like that's not what that word means. You can't use it like that. I mean, we can only in the sense of like, you know, I think you might have misunderstood that word. Like if you use it that way, nobody's going to understand what you mean. But if the person says, no, that's the game I'm playing today. Today, compassionate means this. Okay, then no, my family is not compassionate, meaning we don't go fishing every Sunday. You know, that's as long as you understand clearly what it is you're doing, it's fine. It's fine. Like that's been my approach, as I know I've mentioned in the past, but that's been my approach now for some years. For when people ask if Buddhism is a religion, like, oh well, what do you mean when you say religion? And then just based on what they say, I say yes or no depending on that, you know. And I do clarify, just for the sake of them avoiding confusion, that different people might define religion in different ways. So depending on your definition, the answer would be different. But according to the way you're defining it, the answer is this, you know. Now this actually ties into to another thing that I want to talk about, which is to get a little bit more into what is it that we do mean by love and compassion. When we're talking here, what is the game we're playing? What is the convention that we're using with these words, right? When I'm saying compassion today, what am I saying? When I'm saying love today, what am I saying? And I think that thankfully, and when I say thankfully, like that is such an understatement. Like it's like insanely lucky that we live in a world and at a time when, generally speaking, people have a sense that love and compassion are good things, you know. Typically speaking, people's objections to them might be more along the lines of it's not realistic or something. Like it would be good, but it's not realistic. Oh God, like that is not the case in most worlds, is my understanding, I am told, you know. We are insanely lucky to be living in a world where there is that kind of general feeling, you know. But, well, I shouldn't say but, I should say and. There's a very vague sense, I think, in general, about what it is that we mean when we say love, what it is that we mean that we say compassion. I mean, for one thing, the word compassion in English, I mean, most people don't really have a very clear sense of what it means, I don't think. But the word love in English, it means so many different things, you know. I care about you so deeply, but I've only known you for a while, so I'm not ready to say I love you yet. That's one meaning, you know. I love my friends so much. That's another meaning. Oh, I love pizza. That's another meaning. These are all very different things, right? And so we just kind of get this message, whether explicitly or implicitly, of, oh, we should be more loving, you know. But not only are we not quite sure exactly what that means, but we are also not really taught how most of the time, you know. I don't know, like if we see some tragedy on TV or something and we don't feel some emotion in the moment, we might think to ourselves, oh my God, I need to be more compassionate. And we might almost try to squeeze some muscle, you know, to make it happen. But that's, well, frankly, kind of crazy. It's a little bit like if you plant a seed and you water it and you give it sunlight and all, and then a sprout comes up, a little sprout, and we think like, oh no, I need this to be a tree. I need this to be a tree. And then so you try to pull it, to stretch it. That's just not how it works, you know? All impermanent phenomena, all phenomena that change, all phenomena that are momentary, that change from moment to moment, whatever, all impermanent phenomena, they arise through causes and conditions. If all of the causes and conditions are present, then the thing will happen unquestionably. If any one of the causes or conditions is absent, then the thing will not happen, period. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, if you plant a seed, like a flower, like a seed for a flower, let's say, and you cover it on earth with nutrients and you water it and you give it sunlight and you take care of it, and then you pray and you say, may this not become a flower, may this not become a flower, may this, it's going to become a flower, right? All the causes and conditions are there, right? In the same way, if you create the causes and conditions for love and compassion, Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, he says it about something else, but I think it's, I forget what, but it's the same principle. I think it's bodhicitta that he says it for. But if you create the causes and conditions for, let's say, love and compassion, and then you pray, may I not develop love and compassion, may I not develop love, you're still going to develop love and compassion. It's just cause and effect, right? There's nothing mystical or magical or, you know, special about it in that sense. Similarly, if you don't plant the seed, or if you plant it but you don't water it, or if you plant it and water it but you don't give nutrients, or if you plant it and water and give it nutrients but you don't give it sunlight, you can pray, may a flower grow, may a flower grow, no flower is going to grow. Likewise, you can pray, may I be loving and compassion, may I be loving and compassion, may I be loving and compassion. That is not nothing, don't get me wrong. That is definitely something. That is definitely something, but that's not enough, right? It's not going to happen based on that. And it's certainly not going to happen based on you yelling at yourself and saying you should be more this or you should be more that. Like that's just going to make everything worse. So we'll talk about the causes of love and compassion, but before we do, I do want to talk a little bit about what love and compassion are and what love and compassion aren't. So, sorry, just one moment. So there are many things that we might consider to be somewhat like related to love and compassion, or that we might confuse for love and compassion. But that in Buddhism, we would draw a distinction. So first of all, once again, let's do the definitions of love and compassion. This is how you'll know them when you see them. Love is wanting somebody else to have happiness and the causes of happiness. That's it. Compassion is wanting somebody else to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. That's it. As we'll see, there are many subtypes. There are many, like if you want somebody to have happiness and the causes of happiness in this way, then it's this type of love. If we want somebody to have happiness and the cause of happiness in that way, then it's that kind of love. But whatever has those criteria, it's love. Attachment is holding on to something very strongly, very tightly, due to believing that it can cause that it plays a more central role in your happiness than it actually does. In your happiness than it actually does. So you can see, those definitions sound nothing alike, love and attachment. They sound nothing alike because they're not. Love, wanting somebody else to have happiness and the causes of happiness. Attachment, grasping on very tightly to something due to believing that it has a more central role in creating your own happiness than it actually does. So one is a wish, the other is a mistake, right? Like we're talking about different things. What's interesting is that the word love in English, which again has many meanings, one of the common meanings of it refers to some mixture of love and attachment. When people say, I love you, they're saying a couple of things. They're saying, I have some love for you and I have some attachment for you, right? Well, I have some love for you and I have a great deal of attachment for you, probably. Like at least when they say it, let's say in a romantic relationship, it's like, have you said I love you yet? No, I haven't said it yet. Okay, fine, the time has come. I love you, right? The reason people wait to say it generally is because they feel like their attachment isn't strong enough yet to warrant it. I don't yet think you are that central to my happiness. right? Let me wait until I think you're more central to my happiness. Then I'll say I love you, right? And I'm not criticizing. Again, it's a free word. People can use it however they want, but it's just good to recognize that that's different from what we mean when we say love here, right? Make no mistake, as long as we're ordinary beings, love is always going to be mixed with attachment, always. Ultimately, what we want to develop is pure love unmixed with attachment, right? But that's what we want to develop. Ultimately, we can't start from there. It's like you can't, it's like, how can you grow a flower? Step one, take the flower and, well, you can't. Like, these are the instructions for how to grow it, So how do you develop pure love? Step one, with pure love, no, you can't. You don't have it yet. You're not supposed to. You're not expected to. If you did, we wouldn't need Buddhism, right? So you're going to feel things that are combinations of love and attachment. Rejoice in the love part of it. Be so happy for that. And be totally understanding and forgiving and no big deal about the attachment part of it. And just have in the back of your mind the sense of like, yeah, and over time, let me keep working to reduce the attachment, right? So there's this really great Theravada teacher named Ajahn Brahm, who says this. He says how to understand the difference between true love, like real love, and attachment. He says, imagine you come home after a long day at work to your spouse, and instead of finding your spouse, you find a letter that says, "Dear you, for many years I have been unhappy in our marriage. And for the last several years, I've become closer and closer to Adnar. Adnar gives me things that you have never been able to give me. He fulfills me in ways you never were able to. I feel so happy when I'm with him in a way that I never felt when I was with you. And so I've decided to leave you and go far away and build a life with Adnar. Cordially, your spouse, ex-spouse." True love would be to say, I'm so glad that they found happiness if they didn't have it. Like, you'd be overjoyed, you'd be ecstatic, you'd be like, I didn't know that they were so unhappy. I'm so glad. Oh, Adnar, thank you, thank you, thank you. Right? Ajahn Brahm says, true love is very rare. Right? The anger part would come from the attachment. Again, don't beat yourself up. Don't kick yourself. Of course, you'd be upset, if you're not like a very, very advanced practitioner in the higher paths, of course you're going to be upset. It's natural, but you can just recognize this part is love, this part is attachment. So there are a couple of other terms that we have in the West. Empathy, empathy. What's the difference between empathy and compassion? Empathy just means that you are feeling what the other person is feeling along with them, or it means that you are at least truly able to imagine a very visceral way what they must be feeling. That's empathy. So if you say something and somebody picks up and says, oh my gosh, that must be so sad, and they're right, that's empathy, right? Compassion, again, is the wish for others to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So empathy often comes hand in hand with compassion. They often come together, but not always. You know, you can have compassion, more compassion than empathy. You can definitely have more empathy than compassion, you know. Then there's sympathy. And sympathy, I actually looked it up just to make sure that I wasn't going to say something wrong. And sympathy, according to, I think I looked it up on dictionary.com ultimately, it's a feeling of sorrow for someone else's misfortune, you know? So something goes wrong for somebody else and you feel sad. That's sympathy. Now, that's not unrelated to compassion, right? But again, compassion would be the wish for them to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So how do those two things relate? That's something you can think about for yourself and like play around with, you know, think about like, could I have sympathy without compassion? Could I have compassion without sympathy? You know, could I have sympathy without empathy? Could I have compassion without empathy? Could I have empathy without compassion? Like, you know, you can think about it, but they are referring to different things. Those are some terms that we use in the West. There's one more, but I'm holding off on that for a reason. I'll come back to it. But then there are some other terms that we see in Buddhism. No, you know what? Fine. Let me go ahead. I'm sorry. I keep changing my mind. Let me say the one that I was holding off on. Pity. Pity. Pity is very different from compassion. Now, pity might have a basis on compassion, but it adds a distortion on top of it. Pity is when we see somebody else's suffering and we see it through the lens of like a sharp distinction between us and them. You know, it's as if we were like looking, and I don't mean looking down in the sense of sneering, but like looking down upon them from like a great height or something. It's like, oh, poor people down there, you know, I'm so safe up here. You know what I mean? It's there's a sense of like one-upping unintentionally, hopefully. Like it's a very us versus them, like, oh, they have this problem. Thank God I don't, you know? Whereas compassion is just wanting them to not suffer in the same way that we want us to not suffer. There's no sharp distinction drawn. Compassion is you see suffering, you don't want it to be there. If you see suffering here and you don't want it to be there, that's not called compassion. If you see suffering there and you don't want it to be there, that is called compassion, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same not wanting. It's not a different type of not wanting. You know? So I think generally speaking, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, nobody really likes to be pitied. You know, there's something insulting about it. There's something invalidating about it because it by definition, it's mixed in with this sense of like infantilizing or minimizing or saying like you're not as fortunate as I am type of thing, you know? But typically speaking, nobody really minds others having compassion for them. People actually, typically speaking, really, really crave that. We all do. We all need it, Lord knows. Any questions about that or thoughts about that? Okay. So then those are common terms in the West. Then there are some terms that we find in Buddhism that if we study Buddhism, sometimes you might also confuse them for love and compassion, even though these are different things. So one is rejoicing. And rejoicing is feeling happy for somebody else's happiness, right? Or, I mean, rejoicing is just feeling happy for something, really. But like when we talk about rejoicing in the sense that it could be confused, it's like, oh, I'm so glad this happened for you. I'm so glad, like, you know, whether you say it or not, show it or not, like you feel it, right? It's certainly related to love, right? But it is different. Another is kindness. this is interesting because I think probably this must be common, but certainly for me, it was only not too long ago that I realized that I'd been interpreting the word kindness as it's used in Buddhism incorrectly. In the West, when we say kindness, we're typically, I think, talking about some kind of motivation, some kind of like, like wish to help or something like that. But the word that gets translated as kindness in Buddhism is really more referring to helpfulness. It's referring to the actions that are helpful to others. We don't really worry about the motivation in the use of that word. The question of the motivation would be something else. That's why we can say in Buddhism that our enemies are so kind to us. It doesn't mean that they have the motivation. They're like, oh, let me help them by being difficult. They might have the motivation of wanting to hurt, and yet it's so helpful. It's so precious and so helpful if we're practicing the mind training practices. And so on that basis, then we have the next thing, which is gratitude, which is usually translated as wishing to repay the kindness, right? And what that means is it's appreciating the beneficial things that others have done for us and wishing to benefit them in return. Just a few more. Then we have equanimity. Equanimity is not the same as compassion. Equanimity is not the same as love. Equanimity is the feeling that doesn't distinguish among people on the basis of what they've done for me, but rather looks at people on the basis of their wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So in other words, we see everybody as equal because everybody equally wants happiness and doesn't want suffering. As opposed to the thing that we do typically, which is to look at people based on, have they been nice to me? Are they deserving of happiness based on having been nice to me or those I care about? Are they deserving of suffering based on what they've done to me or those I care about? Right. So equanimity is kind of seeing through that and recognizing that that's beside the point, because that's such a momentary, transient, ever-shifting thing. If we were to go by that, every sentient being since beginning of this time has done every kindness to us and has done every cruelty to us. So all we're really going by when we go by that is like, what have they done for me most recently that I can remember? And that's just so random, really. It's not a steady basis. So equanimity is just relinquishing that and just forget what they've done for me. How much do they want happiness? How much do they want to avoid suffering? It's always the same for everybody. Then there's something called exceptional resolve. There's different translations for it. It's like the altruistic attitude. But that means taking full responsibility for freeing all beings from all levels of suffering, even if we have to do it by ourselves. So compassion has to exist before this can exist. So compassion wishes all beings to be free from suffering and the cause, or wishes beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Exceptional resolve says, it's up to me. I'll make it happen. It's my responsibility. I hope people help me, but even if nobody helps me, I'll see this through. I will end their suffering. And then there's bodhicitta. Now, if you ask a Western Buddhist, what does bodhicitta mean? 5 gets you 50, that they'll say, oh, it's a warm heart, it's compassion, right? It ain't. bodhicitta is based on that exceptional resolve that I just mentioned. Bodhicitta is very specifically a mind that looks at the prospect of our own future enlightenment and is motivated to achieve that in order to lead all beings to enlightenment. If it's that, it's bodhicitta. If it's not that, it's not bodhicitta. If it's bodhicitta, it's that. If it's not bodhicitta, it's not that. So it's very specific. It specifies an object and everything. It looks at, like, the object of bodhicitta is our own future enlightenment. It looks at that with a motivation to attain it, but that motivation is driven by the wish to bring all beings to enlightenment. So you can have all the compassion in the world and think, I want beings not to suffer. Oh, how I wish that they wouldn't suffer. You know, and all the loving kindness, the love in the world, and say, oh, I want beings to be happy. How I wish they had happiness in the causes of happiness. But that's not bodhicitta at that point, you know? Then you can have exceptional resolve. You can say to yourself, I will make this happen. I will make this happen. I will make sure that every being has happiness and the cause of happiness and is free from suffering and the cause of suffering. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care who's going to help me. I don't care if everybody tries to hinder me. I will see it happen. That's exceptional resolve. And you can say exceptional again. And that's still not bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is only when, on the basis of that, when you have a concept of enlightenment and you realize that enlightenment is what all beings need, that's the happiness that they need, the freedom from suffering that they need. And you realize that the only way that you can accomplish that goal of bringing all to enlightenment is by becoming enlightened yourself. And so then you say, I want to become enlightened so I can bring all beings to enlightenment. That's bodhicitta. That's why bodhicitta is something that we have to build up to through so many steps. You know, to develop bodhicitta, we need to develop love. We need to develop compassion. We need to develop the exceptional resolve. And we need to understand, you know, all the ins and outs of enlightenment in principle, so that and then bodhicitta will arise. Now, one more concept that I want to get into before our lunch break is just to introduce a couple more things that we often can confuse for love and compassion. And in Buddhism, we have this really cool in the sense of like insightful and helpful concept that the states of mind that we want to develop, they have what we could call enemies, which are other states of mind. There are some states of mind are enemies of the others. Interestingly, when it's a state of mind that we don't want, we call the opposing one an antidote. When it's a state of mind that we do want, we call the opposing one an enemy, right? Just the terminology because of what our goals are. But the states of mind that we want, they have two kinds of enemies. They have what are called far enemies and what are called near enemies, right? And this is, I think, fascinating and so helpful to know. Far enemies are, you know, like the far enemy of a state of mind is a different state of mind that is almost diametrically opposed to it, that it's very obviously incompatible with it, that we can clearly see, well, if I have that, of course, I'm not going to have this. They're the opposite, you know? So for love, it could be something like envy, you know, like envy, it's like being upset that others have nice things, right? For compassion, it's going to be cruelty. You know, it's, I want people to suffer. You know, I want others to suffer. So it's very clear that these things can't coexist with love and with compassion. And so those are the far enemies. Like those are the enemies we see very clearly in the distance and we want to keep away from. But then the states of mind, they also have near enemies. And near enemies, they're things that are also incompatible with the states of mind we want, but they're similar in some respect, such that we can confuse them for each other or think that they're supportive to each other, right? So they're almost more like spies. They're working for the enemy, but we don't recognize them and we might think they're friends, right? Or we might even mistake them for the ally itself. So for love, the near enemy is attachment, right? We can confuse holding on to somebody because we think they make us happy for wanting them to be happy, right? To whatever extent we have attachment, you know, like to that extent we have less love. To whatever extent we have love, to that extent we have less attachment. Again, until we are extremely advanced, love and attachment will be unavoidably mixed. Don't let that stop you from practicing and rejoicing in love, you know? Like Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we have to start somewhere. You know, if you wait until you have no attachment before you start practicing love, you're going to wait till the end of time, you know, by definition. Now, what are the near enemies of compassion? Well, this is where I was wanted to save up pity, because pity is one of the near enemies of compassion. Pity is one of the things that we can confuse for compassion, or that we can think is compassionate, and we can think we should cultivate, or that we should rejoice when we see it in others and things like that, you know? Again, pity, that sense of like, almost like inferiorizing the other person because of their suffering, you know, and wanting to help as if from above, you know, as opposed to wanting to help the same way that like the fingers help like remove like a splinter from the arm. Like it's not from above, it's like, ow, right? Another near enemy of compassion is what Lama Yeshe called idiot compassion. Idiot compassion is just this like emotion, like kind of like very emotional sense of like, I don't want people to be unhappy. You know, like notice what my hands are doing. Like, you know, it's like I can't abide, I can't sit still. Like it's like, oh no, like no, that's gonna no, he's not gonna like to hear that. So let's not say it. You know, it's like treating people as fragile a little bit, I think. It's like, I mean, I have bucket loads of this. Like with our dog Snoopy. Whenever I think he's hungry, I'm like, you know, like, oh, we should give him something. And my husband's like, no, he's gaining weight. It's important for him not to, you know, the vet said, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but he's hungry. You know, that's idiot compassion. It's not evil. It's not selfish necessarily. I mean, maybe it's mixed in with some attachment. I mean, it's almost certainly mixed in with some attachment. But it's unhelpful. It can actually hurt people instead of helping them, right? Geshe Sopa, Geshe Tupten Sopa is a fantastic teacher. He always says to me, so he speaks English, but he only learned English very late. He hasn't studied very much, so his English tends to follow like Tibetan grammatical structure. And what's interesting is that like he thinks that's a bad thing, but I find it so helpful because like there are certain things that if he just said in English, like they would go in one ear and out the other. But like when he says it in this way, like there's something surprising about it and it really sticks. So I always hear his voice saying this. He said it to me so many times. He says, compassion wisdom together need. Compassion, wisdom together need. He also says sometimes to me, analysis also need, which means, we need to analyze things, including we need to analyze if we're analyzing too much, but compassion, wisdom together need, which in uninteresting English would be compassion needs wisdom to be together with it, needs to come together with wisdom, Otherwise, we could be making things worse. That would be like, and that's kind of where idiot compassion comes in. It's like seeing somebody after a car crash lying down and just like wanting to lift them up to help them, and maybe you break their neck, So anyways, that's idiot compassion. And then the third near enemy of compassion is despair. And that's when we see somebody suffering, and instead of kind of in a clear-headed way wishing for their suffering to end, in such a way that we might actually be able to think of if there's something we can do to help. Despair is when we let ourselves be overwhelmed by suffering too. And it really just doesn't help. It really just doesn't help. Like we see people in the world, like on TV, let's say, who don't have anything to eat, and then we just kind of are turned off from our dinner and we just don't want to eat either. That's a near enemy of compassion, but it is an enemy nevertheless, If there's somebody starving somewhere far away, let's say, and I have dinner in front of me, but I see them starving and I say, I can't bring myself to eat now. No, there's somebody that's starving and somebody who's not eating and food going to waste. Nobody's benefited. Asterisk. There might be a certain context, a certain time and place where maybe there is a sense in which that's reinforcing our compassion. So maybe, but generally speaking, the best thing if we want to act on that compassion is first to eat and use those calories to think about what can we do to help. Can we do something to provide immediate help? Like immediate in the Buddhist sense of like within this lifetime. And if not, then by God, let's redouble our efforts to become enlightened so that we can help then. But sitting and doing nothing isn't helpful, and certainly just making ourselves miserable, that's not helpful either. Thoughts, questions, concerns? I think that's an important point. I'm a psychologist, and one of my main specialties is working with people who are chronically suicidal, and they have so much suffering. And people sometimes, when they hear that I do that, they say, like, how can you bear it? How can you, like, every day for all those hours sit with people who are suffering so much? And it's interesting, the first time somebody asked me, like, I had to now I have my stock answer because I've already kind of figured out what it is, but like I had to really think about what it was. But what it turns out to be is that it doesn't feel overwhelming because there's something that I can do to help. I'm not just sitting there. I'm talking to them and there's something that I can do. And I genuinely think that if the people I work with, if I weren't working with them, if instead I had to sit down and watch a documentary about them, then I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because then it's just sad and there's nothing to do, you know, there's nothing to be done. Now, as a Buddhist, though, that's never true. As a Buddhist, there's always something to be done. There's certainly not always something that can be done in the moment, which is the problem. I mean, if there was always something that we could do in the moment, we wouldn't need to become enlightened, right? Think about that. If anytime we saw suffering, we could remove it, that's what we're striving for. We don't need to become enlightened, right? There's definitely not always something that can be done in the moment, which is the big problem. That is the big problem. Being a Buddhist means being not okay with that. And so we need to become enlightened. That's the only way. That's the only way. Then we'll be able to do everything that's possible to be done. And so when we see suffering, if we can help immediately, help immediately. If we can help immediately with wisdom, then help immediately with wisdom, absolutely. If there's nothing that we can do immediately, then take it and use it to redouble your commitment to becoming enlightened. If you're ready, if you've taken bodhisattva vows, or you know, if that's where you can even make a vow, you can even say, I vow that I will become enlightened to help that being. And then of course do it, you know, don't just vow it, then go and become enlightened. Okay. All right, anything else before we stop for lunch?
I just want to say thank you, Gus, for this morning's teachings. Today is my birthday, and no, it isn't ending in a 0, but I'm going out with some friends. So
Good.
I'll see you next time. I always
Good.
appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you so much. A very happy birthday to you, and I hope you have a great time. And thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
After lunch, what I'd like to touch on are the different types of compassion and the different types of love. And then to talk about how do we do that? What are the causes and conditions? You know, so Charlene, if you want, maybe later, if it's helpful to you, you can also watch the recording. But because otherwise I'm like in the Lamrim, it talks about the man who is praising sandalwood incense, you know, sandalwood incense, it's the best. You have to, you know, like you have got to buy some sandalwood. It's like a salesman. Got to buy, got to buy, got to buy, and says, okay, do you have any sandalwood incense? Oh no, I don't have any. Right? So it's like, oh, love and compassion, love and compassion. It's like emptiness and this and that, and you can make a vow and this and this. Like, so how do I do it? It's like, oh, we don't have time. You know? So we'll do it. But okay, so we're breaking for lunch for an hour and a half. So I think by you guys, it is noon now. Yes. So we shall meet up again at 1:30. Right.
Perfect.
I'm only able to do that because I'm not latched onto the inherent existence of the right time. It's not really noon. It is actually 2:00. Right? All right. See you guys in a little bit. Everybody, welcome back. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about different types of compassion and love that we talk about in Buddhism. Again, I think in the West, I think Western science and Buddhism have a tremendous amount of similarity between them. There's a certain spirit that they share, specifically the reliance on empiricism and logic as the two modes of, valid knowledge. And I think what's really interesting is that historically, each of those two kind of turned its attention in one direction and really specialized in one area of reality, as it were. Western science really turned its attention out toward physical phenomena. And it developed more and more technologies for observing physical phenomena, for understanding physical phenomena, and has done a fantastic job of it. It's far from complete, it still has a long way to go, but it's done a fantastic job. Whereas Buddhist science turned its attention into into subjectivity itself, into experientiality itself, and developed more and more technologies for observing that, for understanding that, and has done a fantastic job of understanding that too.
Check 1, 2.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, no problem. And so in the same way that in Buddhism, if you take a look at all of the phenomena that exist and the way Buddhism kind of classifies them, you can say, all right, among the selfless, there are existence and non-existence. Among the existence, there are impermanent phenomena and permanent phenomena. Okay, among the impermanent phenomena, there are forms of physical phenomena, there are ways of experiencing things, and then there are non-associated compositional factors. All right, among non-associated compositional factors, there are beings, and there are non-associated compositional factors that are not beings. All right, among beings, there are 6 types is one way of categorizing them. One of those types are animals. There's 2 types of animals that live in the depths and animals that live on the surface, and there we stop, right? So we divide all of that and we get down to animals, and we divide animals into 2 and we stop there. Meanwhile, Western science, starting with Carl Linnaeus, like we have this fantastic system of binomial nomenclature for all manner of, if you just take animals, like, all manner of like families and genuses and classes and orders and species and subspecies and breeds. And, we can distinguish between a Doberman and whatever, On the other hand, when it comes to the mind, the Western side of things, it kind of gets that, kind of classifies, all right, let's say there are emotions and there are thought cognitions. I say this as a psychologist, so, right? And among emotions, like there are positive emotions and negative emotions. And among the positive emotions, there are like the pro-social emotions, like love and compassion and that stuff. And there we stop, Whereas Buddhism, it distinguishes all sorts of things and subtypes of things and so on. It's almost like the binomial nomenclature equivalent for internal phenomena. And so when you read Buddhist texts, you'll often, or hear Buddhist teachings, you'll often hear reference made to different kinds of compassion, different kinds of love. And sometimes I find that if we're not at least aware that there are these distinctions, as far as I'm concerned, and my hope isn't necessarily that you'll remember all of the different ones I'll tell you forever. It's more just to leave the imprint that, yeah, there are these distinctions, because otherwise we can get confused. You might hear something explained one way. I might hear somebody say, oh, immeasurable compassion, blah, 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 blah. And then later we go to another teaching and we hear somebody say something about great compassion and it seems to be different. And we're confused and we think, wait, but I thought it was this, but really it's that. I don't know what's going on. And it can help, in my opinion, just to know like, oh, maybe they were talking about 2 different kinds of compassion. And then you can investigate and find out, So with all of that preamble, compassion. So compassion, again, the wish for others to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. That's it. If there is the wish for others to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, then it's compassion, right? If it's compassion, then it's that. So one type of that is what we call ordinary compassion. Ordinary compassion is typically the one that we tend to think of when we think of compassion. Ordinary compassion is compassion where the others in question, right? We said, so compassion is the wish for others to be free of suffering. The others are those we feel sympathy for. So those that we feel this emotional pull, like this emotional like sense of like, it's not fair. Their suffering is not fair. So those people could be people we know, like our loved ones, our friends, our acquaintances, or it may be people that we don't know, like people that we see suffering in the news, or that we hear about, or something like that, or even that we witness on the street. It could be people that we are attached or attracted to, again, like loved ones, or it could even be people that we're slightly repulsed by, like people who suffer severe injury, and it's kind of difficult and painful for us to even look, but we want them to not be suffering. So one of the things that makes it ordinary compassion is that the others are people that we feel sympathy for. And then the other thing that makes that ordinary compassion is that the type of suffering that we want them to be rid of is one or more types of the suffering of suffering. One or more, but not all types of the suffering or of suffering. Suffering of suffering is the things that we immediately recognize as suffering. So like injury, loss, shame, depression, anxiety, inconveniences, it could, however slight or however severe, but they're things that just kind of suck on the face of them, So again, ordinary compassion, we're focused on people that we have sympathy for, and we are focused on some type of the suffering of suffering, and we wish that they were free of that. Now, another type of compassion is immeasurable compassion. So immeasurable compassion is compassion. So it's the wish for others to be free of suffering and the cause of suffering. But the others that it's aimed at are different, and the suffering that it's aimed at is different. So here, the others in question are all samsaric beings. All samsaric beings. So samsaric beings are everybody who is not an arhat or a Buddha. So humans, animals, microscopic beings who are sentient, any aliens that might exist, ghosts and spirits and devas and asuras and hell beings and hungry ghosts, and just anyway, beings in the bardo. Just if it's somebody that hasn't yet escaped samsara for good, then immeasurable compassion covers them. That's what makes it immeasurable. It's that there's an infinite number of beings that are involved, that are the object of this compassion. And the suffering that it is wishing that they were free of is all forms of samsaric suffering. So all three kinds of suffering in samsara. So the suffering of change, and the all-pervasive conditioned suffering. So suffering of suffering, we already mentioned. Suffering of change is basically being in contact with something that might seem pleasant at first, but becomes more and more painful the more you stay in contact with it. Like listening to your favorite song. You know, it's very pleasant at first, but if you had it on loop, it wouldn't take too long before it wasn't that pleasant anymore, you know? It's types of suffering that get mistaken for happiness. There is happiness, there is real happiness, but that's not it, basically. And all pervasive conditioned suffering is the condition of having a mind and body that are constantly being tossed about by delusions, by karma, like almost like, I never thought of it this way. It's almost like, what do you call that thing where somebody kind of steals something of yours and then you run to them and they toss it to the other person, and then you run to the other person to get it and they toss it to you, you know, and you're kind of like caught in the middle like that. Is it monkey in the middle? Is it something like that?
Keep away.
Keep
No,
away. Keep
That's what
away.
we call
Yeah.
it.
And I think I've also heard it called monkey in the middle or something. It's almost like that's a horrible position to be in. And samsara is kind of like that. It's like karma and delusions kind of toss your happiness over there, and then you run to it, and then karma and delusions toss your happiness over here, and then you run to it. And that's all pervasive conditioned suffering. That sometimes you might feel happy because you think you might be approaching the happiness, you might be getting near it, but then it's gone, you know? So immeasurable compassion, it's focused on all samsaric beings. And in terms of all the three types of suffering, it thinks three things. It thinks how wonderful it would be if all beings were free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and may I be able to free them from suffering and the causes of suffering. So by its very nature, by its very definition, immeasurable compassion has to be based on equanimity. It has to be based on a lack of discrimination between some people as being attractive, some people as being aversive, some people as being indifferent. It has to be equal towards all. And immeasurable compassion is something that we can only actually realize in dependence upon one of what are called the jhanas or dhyanas, the highest states of concentration. You know, it's a very advanced thing. In the meantime, we're working up to it. We're accustoming ourselves to it. We're building up to it. But one of the goals is immeasurable compassion. Then another type of compassion is called great compassion. If immeasurable is not enough, great compassion is much broader still, if you can believe it. Great compassion, first of all, it's aimed at all limited beings. So what that means is it's all samsaric beings plus the arhats who are not yet Buddhas. So anybody who isn't a Buddha yet, even if they're in nirvana, but they're not omniscient. And the types of suffering that it's focused on, it's not just, it's focused on the three types of samsaric suffering, yes, but it's also focused on the shortcomings of having a mind that is still limited in some way. Remember how earlier we were talking about how the whole problem with samsara is that there isn't always something you can do to remove the suffering right away for somebody else, right? And that's a shortcoming that arhats still experience if they're not Buddhas, you know? And so here we're including even that as one of the types of suffering that we want the beings to be free from. It's basically all beings who have something less than everything, you know? It entails those same three wishes that we just said for immeasurable compassion. How wonderful it would be if they were free from this. May they be free from this. May I be able to free them from this. And it leads to, and then is conjoined with exceptional resolve, which we talked about earlier, which is taking full responsibility ourselves to free all beings from all levels of suffering, even if I have to do it by myself. It's, yeah. So to have this type of compassion, unlike the others, to have this type of compassion, we need not only to feel like they say like disgust at the suffering that exists, but also we need to have already like a full conviction that true cessation of suffering, like a true stopping of suffering forever, is possible. And that the true pathway mind of realizing emptiness is the way to bring about that true cessation. These are very, very lofty states of mind, right? And then there's one more level of compassion that's even greater than that. This is the greatest level of compassion, and it's called the great enlightening compassion of a Buddha. Great enlightening compassion of a Buddha. And it's the same as great compassion as we just explained it, except it's based on the enlightening ability to lead all beings to enlightenment due to having an omniscient awareness of the skillful means suited to each individual being. So its motivation is the same, but it's built on a foundation of knowing exactly how to accomplish that goal in every particular case. That's something that only a Buddha has. That's why we need to become Buddhists. That's the reason. Now, when it comes to love, it's interesting because the types of love that, as far as I was able to track them all down, they seem to be divided a little bit differently. But I think we could make a parallel. I don't see any reason why we couldn't make a parallel division, with like ordinary love, then immeasurable love, then great love, then the great enlightening love of a Buddha. I would think we could, but typically there's a little bit of overlap. But typically we hear about like 4 different kinds of love. One is called loving kindness. And loving kindness is a state of mind where we wish. So love is the wish for others to be happy and to have the causes of happiness. Period. So loving kindness is a state of mind with which we wish others to be happy and have the causes of happiness, but we also act towards them in a helpful way. It's like through that same motivation. Like it's not just passive, I guess. It's not just like sitting there saying, oh, I wish, but it's simultaneously motivating us to do, right? That's loving kindness. Then we have one that for some reason, I feel like we don't talk about very often, even though it's right there in the Lamrim, it's right there in the teachings. But it's a lovely, sweet one called heartwarming love. And heartwarming love I'll give you a couple of different ways that I saw it defined. One way that I saw it defined is it's the state of mind with which one has a feeling of closeness and warmth toward anyone we meet. And another way that I've heard it defined is the feeling that all other sentient beings are dear and appealing, right? They say that with this kind of love, everybody you meet seems to you beautiful. They seem beautiful to you. I mean, they are. You see it, you recognize it, right? It's like you're happy to see them. Quick story. One time when I was in college, I was in Boston, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama was coming to talk at the Kurukula Center, the FPMT Center in Boston. And I used to go to the Kurukula Center once in a while. I wasn't a volunteer or anything. I wasn't really involved, but I'd go a little bit once in a while. And when I heard that His Holiness was going to come, you know, it's you know, like His Holiness is coming, like everybody and their mother wants to come to that teaching. But of course, there's only so much space. So understandably, they could only let some people in. So they said, you know, we're going to be inviting the core volunteers, the people who really come frequently and so on. But they said anybody who wants is welcome to come greet His Holiness, like, you know, in the street at the door. And oh my gosh, I was so excited for that. I was so excited for that. So I planned it way in advance. I had to take a bunch of buses to get there. And I got there maybe like 5 hours early. Like I didn't want to risk it, right? And so they were setting up and I offered to help, but you know, they had planned ahead. And so everybody already had a job and there was just nothing else to do. So I stood in the street. Eventually they put up, you know, like those little like metal barriers when they're expecting crowds, you know. They were so lovely. They got loudspeakers, or you know, like what do you call them, like stereos, whatever, facing out into the street, so that when His Holiness gave his teaching, everybody in the street could hear it. And over the course of many hours, more and more people started coming and, you know, kind of coming around me, and I was the first one there. And you know, people from the Tibetan community and Westerners and this and that and the other. Why am I saying all of this? Because when finally it was His Holiness, and His Holiness came, and I was, you know, because it was the first one, so like I was across the street, but like right in front of the door. But His Holiness asked to get out of the car before he pulled up to the door so he could kind of come greet the people who were waiting there. And before he got to me, he went into the building, right? And so I went. And so after all was said and done, His Holiness came back out. The car stopped in front of me. So I, you know, it was blocking my view of the door. But His Holiness got in the car right ahead of me. And then he turned and then he saw me. Okay. Can you imagine how happy I was? He made eye contact with me and he waved at me. Can you imagine how happy I was? Can you imagine how happy I was? His Holiness the Dalai Lama was way happier to see me than I was to see him. That is heartwarming love. He looked at me, I'll never forget it. He looked at me as if I were his dearest friend, who he hadn't seen in a long time. He was so happy to see. Nobody's ever been that happy to see me, ever. And I've never been that happy to see anybody, I have to admit, you know. I was shocked. I thought I was so happy to see him, but that was nothing. So that's heartwarming love, you know. Everybody's beautiful. Everybody's a dear friend. You know, we just really care. We want to be near them. We want to hear what they have to say. And the world, just through that alone, the world becomes a blissful place. Imagine, like, everywhere you walk, you're among your dearest friends. You know, it's really cool. It's really cool. But then there is immeasurable love. And this is, similar, it's the counterpart to immeasurable compassion. So it's the wish for all samsaric beings to be happy and to have the causes for happiness. And then there is great love, which is the wish for everyone, including arhats, to be happy and to have the causes for happiness, not only of liberation, but also of enlightenment. Okay, so before we turn to the methods for developing love and compassion, any thoughts or questions or anything that anyone would like to share or ask? No pressure, just if there is. Okay, and let's talk about how to do it. So we've been singing the praises of love and compassion now for a while. So let's say that we were convinced. Let's say that we said, okay, you know what? You got me. I think this is a good plan. Okay, I think this is a good idea. I want to have love. I want to have compassion. What do I do? So here we go. The first thing to do, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, is to recognize that the mind can change through familiarization. Because right now, we don't have, these types of compassion, these types of love, or we have them only in very limited ways, And if we have what's called a, I'm blanking, there's a term now I'm blanking on, a mindset, I forget, it's not a static mindset, a fixed mindset, I think it's called, a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset, it's a Western psychology concept for this kind of like assumption or belief that however we are now, that's just the way we are. It's kind of innate to us, And so we might go around saying things like, well, I'm not a very compassionate person, or I'm not a very loving person, And that would be rude if not for the fact that it's an honest mistake. Like that it's kind of like dodging responsibility if not for the fact that it's an honest mistake. Like we really do make that, we really think that way. We're not just making an excuse. But what we want is to have a change mindset, which is the way things actually work. Buddhism has always said this, and Western science finally caught up in the last few decades with neuroplasticity and all of that, that it's not that we fundamentally are certain ways when it comes to our personalities. It's that that's what's happening right now. And it will stay that way unless something happens to change it, like a river will run the same course forever unless something happens to, to like deviate its course. But that if something happens to deviate its course, then the water's going to go somewhere else. It's not made of ice, it's made of flowing water, right? In the same way, our personalities really is just a name that we give to like the aggregate of all our habits. And our habits will stay the same way until something happens to kind of change their course. And then they will change their course. They're not made of ice either. They're made of running water, as it were. And it takes determination is what it really takes. It takes determination, it takes effort, it takes patience, it takes self-compassion, self-forgiveness, and it takes time. But that's all. Just that. So I guess, we can think about it as noticing when we're having thoughts like, well, I'm not the Dalai Lama, I'm not compassionate like him. And just practice exchanging those thoughts for, yeah, like I haven't had as much practice yet. I'm still working on it, you know? Um, there is this movie called The Young Sherlock Holmes, which it was okay, I guess. I think it was a Steven Spielberg movie, actually. And they also messed with like the canon, which whatever, but like in this version, as opposed to reality, Sherlock Holmes and Watson actually met when they were roommates um, in school. And I think it was like when this young Watson meets the young Holmes. Holmes is trying to play the violin and he sounds awful. He gets really frustrated. He throws it and says, damn, this blasted thing. I should have mastered it by now. And Watson says, how long have you been playing? He says, 2 days. Right? So let's not make the mistake Sherlock Holmes made in that movie. It's not a fixed thing. It's a process, So yeah, of course I'm still angry. I'm still impatient. I'm still not moved by the plight of others. I'm still craving the seat on the bus for myself, of course. And I'm a work in progress, like we all are until enlightenment, There's a reason that others need to have great compassion, including for me, because I'm not there yet. Then the second thing is to make a determination that we want to practice this, whenever we want this to be our main focus, to kind of set a strong intention and to practice setting that intention. I would suggest doing it if we really want, if we say, you know what, this is it. I really want to develop love. I really want to develop compassion more. That's probably the most important thing for me to do right now, let's say. Well, then I would suggest setting alarms to go off once in the morning, 3 times during the day, once at night. And in the morning when the alarm goes off, and the alarm can say, remember to practice or whatever. When the alarm goes off in the morning, then we can say, okay, so this, this is my, the next several hours until the next alarm, this is my workspace. This is where like my, workstation is and my tools are. The goal is to build love. The goal is to build compassion, whichever one or both. And let me try my best between now and the next alarm to do that. And then when the next alarm goes off, we say, all right, fantastic. We kind of check in briefly. We think did I do it at all? Like if yes, fantastic. And we really rejoice. And if there were times when I could have, but I didn't, or whatever, I forgot, we do not beat ourselves up. We do not criticize ourselves. We don't even click our tongue. We don't do that. All we do is we say, oh, okay, so that would have been an opportunity. So let me be on the lookout in the next stretch of time until the next alarm to see if another opportunity comes up, right? And then we just do that. We set an intention. And what we're doing is we're literally meditating throughout the day. We can also do it in a formal practice. We can sit in the 7-point posture. That's very helpful. It's very powerful. It's very concentrated. It's very good. So we can sit down and meditate on love, or we can meditate on compassion. But at least as important, and probably more so, is when we're not sitting by ourselves, but when we're out, when we're watching TV, when we're talking to somebody on the phone, on Zoom, when we're interacting with others, when we're seeing things, when we're hearing things, when things are happening. That's the most important part of the meditation, because meditation is just the word that gets translated, that we use to translate gom, which literally actually means familiarization, habituation, accustomation. And it's in the moment when things are happening, that's when we are able to really practice love, compassion. And so that's when we're actually accustoming ourselves to it, right? So then the next thing to do, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, is to start by working to decrease the obstacles to love and compassion. The main obstacles being emotions like anger, resentment, irritation, things like that. So how do we do that? So the Buddha taught many strategies for overcoming anger. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has a wonderful book. It has a new name now, and I forget what it's called, but it used to be called Healing Anger. If you look for it under that title, you'll find what the new name is, where he teaches many, many methods for overcoming anger. But let me review a few of them just because this is such an important piece. So one thing to do is to meditate on the disadvantages of anger. I'm going to list a few of them, okay? Just so you hear them. Anger makes even the most beautiful person appear unattractive. Think of people you've seen when they were angry. Did they look attractive? Imagine what you yourself look like when you are angry. Do you really want to look like that? Anger destroys your physical health and your mental peace. It creates high blood pressure, can lead to heart attacks. Your body is put under a great deal of stress when you're fueled with the fire of anger. Anger makes you lose any sense of discrimination, of like distinction. It forces you and others to act in harmful ways that you regret later. Anger can ruin your sleep, of course. It doesn't say that here, but anger makes you lose friends. Nobody wants to be around an angry person. Anger creates enemies. Once you've harmed someone, they naturally want to harm you back. At the very least, they definitely don't want to help you. There's no chance to be happy when anger is present. You can't be happy and angry at the same time. Anger destroys the causes for your future happiness, burning up eons of positive energy you have accumulated in an instant. Anger has a destructive nature. When anger has dominated your mind, you want to harm people and things. It creates a very tense and uncomfortable atmosphere. You can't be trusted. Anger destroys relationships, makes people lose their jobs and kill one another. During battles, entire cities, the natural environment, and innocent others are destroyed. Another thing that doesn't say here is like anger makes you destroy your own possessions too often, like you throw your phone across the room. Can think about the karmic results that you experience from anger. First, you're reborn in the lower realms. You have terrifying environments and beings living there. When you're reborn as a human, the place is very scary. Angry people are all around you. There's a lot of fighting going on. Your body is unpleasant to look at. People spontaneously feel aversion towards you. You are about to experience others harming you in different ways, behaving towards you as you have behaved, and worse, because karma expands. Because of the imprints of anger on your mind stream, you can't help but get angry again and again and again and continue to create suffering for yourself and others. So when you get angry, you can think about the downsides of anger. Now, the point of that isn't to beat yourself up for feeling angry or to invalidate yourself for feeling angry. It's just because anger sometimes appears as if it were a friend trying to protect us, you know? And so meditating on the downsides of anger, it can help us kind of break that illusion a little bit. The self-respect that's underlying anger is good. The energy that often is accompanied, that often accompanies anger, and the confidence, self-confidence that often accompanies anger, those are good. But we want to create them in other ways. We want to create them in ways that don't have this destructiveness to them and that don't have this like anger is almost like a fire hose that nobody's holding. It's very powerful, but it's kind of flailing all over the place, you know? So we want to create that same power in ways that we are pointing in the directions that we want to overcome the injustices, to overcome the problems and things like that. Another way to overcome anger is to meditate on the shortcomings of samsara. So to think, as long as I'm in samsara, I'll have to experience some pleasantnesses like this. You know, it's unavoidable. This is samsara. You can't have samsara without this any more than you can have water without wetness, right? So why not use this energy to get out of samsara instead of using it to create more suffering in samsara by following anger, right? So in other words, you kind of direct that energy from anger. Instead, you direct it at the cause of samsara itself, at self-cherishing, not at yourself. Do not turn it towards yourself. No, towards the self-cherishing, which is hurting you. Similarly, you can meditate on who the real enemy actually is. You know, the real enemy to worry about is not the external person. The external person is temporary. The external person is limited in their power to make you suffer, even in the short term. And the external person is unable to inflict any harm in the long term over many lives. There's nothing that somebody can do to hurt you beyond this life. The real enemy is anger itself, because anger itself, if you indulge in it, it's self-perpetuating. You know, like it feeds on itself, it increases itself, it leaves imprints for you to feel it again in the future, and so on. Anger itself is able to make us suffer directly in a way that the enemy can't. You know, if the enemy does something, but we don't hear, if the enemy says something, but we don't hear them or we don't hear about it, we're not going to be affected. You know, we're only affected by our experience of what they do. In other words, we're only affected if we get angry, you know, in response to what they do. The anger itself is what's hurting us. And anger itself is also constantly inflicting long-term harm. Anger can and does hurt us in future lives. Another thing to do to overcome anger is to meditate on karma and to think, to kind of remind yourself, if you've truly understood the 12 links of dependent arising, because otherwise this might be a little iffy, because otherwise you might misunderstand this and kind of blame yourself, which is not at all the idea. But if you understand the 12 links of dependent arising, then you can meditate on karma and think, well, it's impossible for me to experience this situation if I hadn't created the cause in the past. You know, so how does it really kind of make sense for me to be angry at somebody else? Again, I don't want to be angry at myself. That's not the point either. Whatever I did under the influence of ignorance. But if somebody punches me, according to the law of karma, if somebody punches me, we might be simplifying it a little bit, but basically it's because I punched them at some point in the past, right? So you could say, well, I started it, so I'm not going to be angry at them. But that's foolish, because if I punched them last life, it's only because they punched me the life before that. Karma is a two-way street, right? So they started it. Well, no, because they only punched me because I punched them, and I only did that because they punched me, and they only did that because I punched them. And the point is that we've been doing this forever. Forever. Since beginningless time, that person and I have just been taking turns punching each other and thinking that we were the victim. And so now, if they punched me, it's my turn to decide what to do. And if I decide not to punch them back, then for the first time in the history of ever, I'll be breaking off that cycle. It ends with me. It's truly remarkable. When somebody, I mean, this sounds crazy. Like if somebody just walks into the room right now, they'll think we're insane. But when somebody hurts us, that is a fantastic opportunity. It's a once in a many lifetimes opportunity to break the cycle once and for all. We've been doing this forever until the person has punched me. They haven't punched me yet this lifetime. They haven't punched me yet this lifetime. Then I don't know. Like maybe they'll perpetuate the cycle. Maybe it'll keep going. But they punch me. It's like, oh, thank God, I have it now. Okay, it stops here. And in meditating on karma too, like we can think about, if I get angry, I'm just going to experience worse suffering in the future. I mean, this is what's been keeping this going forever. Then we can meditate on patience. And we can think it's a little bit similar, but it's a different angle, a different thought. We can think like they hurt me. It's like, ah, this is my chance to practice patience. Like right now, right here, here it is. I'm not going to get angry. This is my teacher manifesting to give me this opportunity. I'm going to do this. I'm really going to do this. This is what I've been waiting for. This is what I've been training for. It's literally impossible to develop patience until such a time as somebody does something crappy to you. There's nothing you can do. Until then, you can only fantasize about it. Oh, it'll be so nice when I have an opportunity. I'm going to be able to practice patience and I'm going to develop patience. Oh, that's going to be wonderful. And patient, it's going to be so blissful. It's going to be so great. Oh gosh, I wonder when I'll have my l'opportunity. And then when it happens, it's like, ah, it's here. It's happening. Is it? You know? The next one is to meditate on compassion. And here again, we think about cause and effect. And we think about it this way. This person, I'm just going to keep using the example of punched. I mean, of course, I hope it goes without saying, this applies to other types of things that irritate us too. This person just punched me. And so because of karma, this person will experience a much worse result in the future. Even rebirth in the lower realms. How can I be angry with somebody who's just on the brink of such horrible suffering? They're like completely possessed by this horrible mind that's causing them to do these things that are going to lead them to suffer. How can I be angry with them now? If we're able to, if we're able to pray, and this is hard, but if we're able to pray, like I hope this karma gets purified. I hope they don't have to go through that. That's the best thing. The next one is one that I find so helpful, so helpful. This is a kind of a logical one. I didn't know what to label this on, so I called it meditate on the appropriateness of the object of anger. And this is the thought. You think about it logically without leaving any options out. And you think, okay, this person just did this. Either they're motivated by delusion or ill will or indifference or something like that, or they aren't. Well, if they aren't, then by definition, they were motivated by correct wisdom and love or compassion. In other words, mind you, right? It's just logical. Like either they were motivated by something opposite to wisdom or love or compassion, or they weren't, right? If they weren't, then they were motivated by wisdom and love and compassion. Well, if they were motivated by wisdom and love and compassion, then there's no need for me to be angry at them. I'm the one who's misunderstanding something. If somebody does something kind, loving, compassionate, and wise, then if I'm irritated, it's because I'm not understanding something. Kind of like if I say to if I live on the 10th floor and I say to my parents, oh, I made a cape, I'm going to fly out the window like Superman. They say, no, 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 no. If I'm angry, it's because I'm not understanding something, right? Now, the other option is that they are motivated by delusion or ill will or indifference or something like that, right? Now, in that case, there are two possibilities. Either that delusion, that ill will, that indifference or whatever is part of their very nature, or it's not. If that, I'll just say delusion, if that delusion is part of their very nature, then being angry at them is like being angry at fire for burning. What can fire do? That's just what it is. It doesn't have a choice. It doesn't have a say. It's just its very nature, you know? You can't be angry at water for being wet. You can't be angry at snow for being cold. You can't be angry at fire for being hot. Like, it's not its fault, right? So the other possibility is that the delusion is not part of their very nature. In that case, if we're angry at them, then we're angry at the wrong thing. Being angry at them is like being angry at a stick that somebody uses to hit you. If somebody hits you with a stick and you look at the person and then you look at the stick and then you just start screaming at the stick, there's some misunderstanding, right? The stick, there was nothing in the stick about hitting you. The stick was controlled by something else, namely the person who hit you, right? But similarly, if it's not in the nature of it's not innate to the nature of the person to want to hit you, to be deluded or whatever, then the person also isn't the one that kind of like manifested that. They were controlled by something else. They were controlled by anger. They were controlled by delusion. They were controlled by ill will. They were controlled by indifference or whatever it may be, which isn't part of them innately. It isn't part of who they are. Ex hypothesis. If it is, then we're back to the fire thing. I find this to be very profound. This comes from Shantideva. And I find this to be very profound. And I think it's the type of thing that the more you think about it, the truer you recognize it to be. At first, it might seem like there's a trick in there somewhere. But what this does is it flies in the face of our assumptions about how free will works, really, if you look at it closely. We have all of these untenable assumptions that we make about why people do the things they do. And this just kind of in a very simple way, it breaks it down. Like, well, look, either it's this or else it's that. If it's this, then it's not on them in a sense because of that. If it's that, it's not on them in a different sense because of that. People are we're all victimized by our delusions. That's why we want to develop bodhicitta, to help all beings overcome their delusions and overcome their suffering. We could say, yes, but they had a free choice to hit me. That is true. If they had not made the free choice to hit me, I would not have been hit. In the same way, the people who died on the Titanic, they only died because they made the free choice to get on board the Titanic. If they had chosen not to get on board the Titanic, they would not have died on the Titanic, right? And yet, they knew not what they did, you know? They were acting under the power of ignorance. And the people who do things out of anger, the people who do things out of ill will, the people who do things out of indifference, ourselves and others, are always acting under the power of ignorance. Anybody who sees clearly would never, ever, ever do such a thing. hurting others is never worthwhile for us. Like hurting others will only lead to suffering for us, never to happiness for us. And so because we only want happiness and we don't want suffering, it follows that if we hurt others, there's some misunderstanding in there somewhere. We're acting under the power of ignorance or delusion somewhere. So I think this one, all of these really, but the important thing about this one is that it can't be forced. We can't say, oh, then it doesn't make sense for me to be angry, so I have to forgive this person. I have to forgive them. It's not like that. It's we think about this premise, we think about this claim, we think about it, we investigate, we object to it, we raise qualms, we figure out the answer to those qualms. And over time, what happens is that just very naturally, the knot unties itself. We just kind of realize, like, just very gently, very naturally, we kind of realize, like, oh, yeah, like I've been angry at the wrong thing. Shantideva says, by all means be angry, but not at the stick and not at the person, but at the delusion. You and the person are being both victimized by the person's delusion. But the person really, if you look at it very carefully, they're being victimized in a much worse way because of their delusion, they hit you with a stick, and now what do you have? You have a bump on your head. Because of their delusion, they hit you with a stick, and now what do they have? They have eons in the hell realms to come. None of us deserved what we got. Both of us were victimized here, but by goodness, one of us more so than the other. It's a crazy thing to say. It's a crazy thing to say. It sounds like we're blaming the victim, but we're not. I mean, certainly it's not the victim's fault. Obviously, it's not the victim's fault. What we're saying is it's not even the perpetrator's fault.
Skylar has a question.
Please.
I was just kind of wondering too, like, from the viewpoint of the attacker, they're not necessarily like attacking you per se, they're attacking the image that they have created of you in their mind. So they're in essence attacking your delusions, not necessarily you in a way.
Yes, absolutely. They're attacking their delusions, right? They're attacking a projection created by their delusions.
Them. Yeah.
That might somehow, in an indirect way, be related to one of your delusions too, But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It makes me think of in middle school, some kid made some joke about my grandmother who lived in Brazil, this was in Florida. And I got so upset, and they saw how upset I got. And so they kept going. And this went on for several days, and I was so upset until one day it occurred to me, they don't know my grandmother. They don't know her name. They don't know what she looks like. They don't know anything about her. Like, they're just saying words, like your grandmother. Like, what are they insulting really? What are they talking about really? And I felt so much better, and I think, Skylar, that's to your point, what people are out against is something else. Like, even, that in that example, in my example, it was very clear cut because like my grandmother was in Brazil and they were in Florida and they'd never met. But the fact that even if they've met you and they've seen you, that just makes it harder for us to notice. But the fact still is that they're not talking about you. They're talking about something in their own head. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes. And then the last method for, and there are others, but the last method I wanted to mention for overcoming anger is to meditate on the emptiness of the object. This is by far the most powerful one, but it's also by far the most difficult one. So we need the others in the meantime. But this one is to try to find the essence of the thing that you're angry about. Like, what exactly is it that's causing your anger, and how does it exist? Like, what establishes it? In fact, you can meditate on the emptiness of three circles, as they say. So, well, I don't know if these would be the three circles, but in any case, you can think about the emptiness of the one who did the thing, the perpetrator. You can think about the emptiness of yourself, the victim. You can think about the emptiness of what was done, you know. But again, to do this, first of all, you need to have like a clear understanding of what emptiness means. Otherwise, you might make the mistake of saying like, oh, I guess nothing really happened. And then you're just gaslighting yourself, you know. That's not it. Yeah, something happened, and yeah, it was a problematic thing that happened, and very possibly something needs to be done about it, you know. It's just about being clear on what it is that did and what it isn't that did happen. Kind of like if we go back to the Monopoly example, if somebody, if we're playing by general rules of collect 200 when you pass go, then if you notice that somebody collected 300 when they passed go, well, yeah, they cheated. They did cheat, you know, but you're going to have a very different experience of it if you recognize the context of it in the game versus if you approach it as if like some fundamental law had been violated, you know, like depending on how hard you grasp at the thing. In either case, you probably need to do something about it. You need to call them out. You need to make them put the money back, whatever, you know, but your emotional reaction is going to be very different if you're kind of doing that because otherwise the game doesn't work and, you know, we're not having fun, versus if you do that from the perspective of what is happening. You're supposed to collect 200. You're not supposed to collect 300. It's always been 200. It's always been 200. Don't you understand? Like, then you're off to the races, you know? But that's how we usually emotionally react to things. Even Monopoly. I'll just say this really quickly along the way. Like the trick with emptiness, I find, is I think it's very much like a game. What is reality is, I mean. There are two extremes that we don't want to fall to. One extreme is to forget that it's just a game, you know? Like if we're playing Monopoly and we collect 200 and then we have to pay rent at a hotel or something and there goes our 200, like if we become despondent and crushed, you know, I had so much that I wanted to do with my $200. Like I had planned this whole future for me and the 200, and I thought I was going to make an investment, and I thought that then we've gone too far. We've forgotten it's okay. It's just a game. You know, we're playing this for fun, right? On the other hand, if we go to the other extreme of somebody says, okay, it's your turn. Do you want to roll? And I say like, what's the point? It's just a game. Then I've missed the point too, right? When I say it's just a game, we have to remember it's just a game. We also have to remember it is just a game, you know? It's not nothing. There's a difference between playing Monopoly and not doing anything, you know? So anyway. So those are some of the methods for getting rid of anger. Let me actually just really quickly review these points very fast. So again, what we said so far is first, you have to recognize that your mind can change through practice, through familiarization. Then you have to set an intention and you have to plan to meditate, not just formally, which is very important, but also throughout the course of the day, right? And by the way, I don't want to make it sound like this is all or nothing. I don't want to make it seem like, well, you have to meditate throughout the day every day, or else you have no hope of anything. The more you do, the more change you'll feel. You know, even if you do a little bit, you'll feel a little bit of change over time. His Holiness the Dalai Lama says to look in increments of 5 years, which is not a very Western thing. But you know, don't think, am I doing better this week than I was last week? Think, am I doing better these days than I was 5 years ago? That's what he says. Then you'll see it. Then you'll see it. But if you do a little bit, you'll have a little bit of change. If you do a lot, you'll have a lot of change. But never by doing more than we can, never by doing more than we're able to, you know? Anyway, recognize the mind can change through familiarization, set an intention, and meditate throughout the day. And then really practice the strategies for overcoming anger, resentment, irritation, and all of that stuff. Then from there, that's the basis from which you can start to actively build up love and compassion. And there are a couple of ways for doing this. The context for these in the Mahayana teachings, by the way, is that we have methods. We have 2 different methods for developing bodhicitta. And along the way to developing bodhicitta, developing love is one of the steps, developing compassion is one of the steps. So when I talk now about how to develop love and compassion, I'm basically going to talk about how to develop bodhicitta, except I'm going to stop before we get to bodhicitta, basically. Right? But I'll still mention how you get from there to bodhicitta. So there are 2 methods. There's also a third, which is a hybrid. The first one is the 7-point cause and effect practice. And the second one is the 5-step method for exchanging self and others. There's also one called the 11-point combined method. It basically takes 7 and the 5. Some of them overlap. So like it just kind of overlays them one over the other, and you can do it in a combined way. But the 7-point cause and effect practice, these methods are both equally effective, they're equally valid, but there are 2 of them because some of us might respond better to like one type of technique, and others of us might respond better to a different type of technique. So the 7-point cause and effect method, this is more of like an emotional, intuitive type of method. It works by building emotions on the basis of each other. You build up an emotion, then from that you build up another emotion, and from that you build up another emotion. The 5-step method for exchanging self and others, that's based more on logic and analysis, on kind of recognizing certain truths. And and so again, if one of these doesn't speak to you as much, you can rely on the other one, and you can keep whichever one on the shelf, like don't throw it away. And if you find both helpful, you can learn the combined method, which is 11 points. So the 7-point cause and effect practice, the more emotional one, it starts, and they both involve emotions and they both involve logic. It's just that, it's where the emphasis is. The 7.1, it starts from the basis. Before the first of the 7 points, there's a basis, which is cultivating equanimity. And this does involve some reasoning. This does involve, and there are methods for doing it where you can do visualizations. You visualize. There's all these ways to do it to make it most powerful. But in essence, you visualize in front of you somebody you love, and you notice the feelings that come up, and then you ask yourself, like, what is it about this person that makes me love them? And you really check for the answers, and you'll find the answers, and you'll typically find, for ordinary beings like us, you'll typically find that the answer has to do with what have they done for me recently, you know? They're always so nice to me. They always make me laugh. They always make me so seen. They always make me feel so secure. They're always so generous to me, and so on, you know? Or to somebody else that I love, you know? They're always so nice to my kid. They're always so kind to my brother, or something like that. Or it could even be relative to somebody that I have sympathy for, you know, like, oh, they're always so nice to underprivileged people. They're always so kind. Like it's wherever my love already reaches me, a loved one, somebody I have sympathy for, wherever my love already reaches, I like this person because they've been kind to people within this circle, right? So, and then you start to think about how unreliable that is, really. You know, like, what would it take for me to change how I feel about them? You know, is there something that I could find out about them that would change how I feel? Is there something that they could say or do that would change how I feel? You think about people who have been friends in the past and have turned into enemies, or who have turned into strangers. You think about how this person that you like so much now, at one point they were a stranger to you, potentially, or even an enemy to you at some point. You think about how in past lives they've been in every position, like, you know, like they've been kind to you and unkind to you, and this and this and that. It's just like an accident of amnesia that you're only remembering a little piece of that. Then you move on to somebody who irritates you, angers you, someone you don't like, someone you feel aversion to, etc. And you do the same thing. You ask, what is it about this person that makes me feel this way? And it will be the same process. You'll find that it has something to do with unkind things that they've done to me or to those in my sphere of caring. And you think the same thing, how precarious that is. How precarious that is. Like, is there anything that they could do or say now that would make me change how I feel about them? And if the answer is no, then you ask, why is it that I have established a way for people to fall out of my love, but I don't have a way for people to get into my love, you know? And you think how they've been a stranger to you, how in past lives they've been a friend to you, you've held their hand and said, please don't leave me, please don't leave me, and now you've just forgotten. And then you do the same thing for a stranger. You pick somebody that you kind of know by sight, but like you don't know their name, you don't know very much about them. They become your stand-in for a stranger. So it could be somebody that you sometimes see on your commute, or somebody that you sometimes see working at a store that you go to, or something like that. And you think, like, what is it that establishes this person as a stranger? You know, and you'll realize because they haven't done much for me one way or the other. And you go through the same process. And for each of them, you also think, the person that I consider a friend, some people consider a stranger. Why? The person that I consider a friend, some people consider an enemy. Why? The person that I consider an enemy, some people consider a friend, some people consider a stranger. The person I consider a stranger, some people consider a friend, some people consider an enemy. And you just really look at that very carefully. And then you also finally, and then you come to a point where you'll realize there isn't much there. That distinction is very flimsily based on accidents of chance. And when you realize that, then you think about how all of these people are equal in wanting happiness and equal in not wanting suffering. They're identical when it comes to that. Identical. And then that's equanimity, when you've gotten to that point. You really feel that, when you really feel that identicalness. Then you move on to the first step of 7, which is cultivating a recognition that everyone has been your mother. And this is based on the Buddhist understanding of beginningless time, that there could never have been a first moment, a first cause, a time when things started. So things that must have existed forever, must have been going forever. And if you give, like, if you wait a few trillion years, there are possible things that won't happen in that time. You know, you could, in theory, roll a die, a fair die, 7 times a second for 1 trillion years and never roll a 6. It's very unlikely, but you could. But if you give it an infinite amount of time, then it's impossible. If you give it an infinite amount of time, it's impossible to never roll a 6, because the experiment is never over. You know, the experiment is only over when you finally do roll a 6, right? And there's no limit, there's no time limit. So because time is infinite going backwards, nothing that's possible, it's not possible that anything that is possible hasn't happened. For any given thing that is possible, it's not possible that it hasn't already happened, right? And we're all sentient beings going around and around in this crazy world, and it's possible for any one of us to be born as the mother of another one. And we have. In fact, we have an infinite number of times. All of us have been everybody else's mother an infinite number of times, and father, and lover, and third cousin, and next door neighbor, and veterinarian, and everything, right? But here, this is an emotion-based one. We're focusing on the mother for a specific reason. We're just focusing on that aspect for a specific reason. So I think about Kafka's Metamorphosis. One morning, Gregor Samsa, right, woke up as a giant insect. That's how it begins. He woke up as a giant cockroach. It's a very interesting story. His family's like, they realize it's him. They're like really grossed out. He's just this cockroach, you know, and he like runs on the walls and the ceiling, and it's all very gross. And when I see a cockroach, I like to think about that. And I like to think about like, oh my gosh, my mom, you know, one day my mom woke up as a cockroach. My grandmother, who I loved very much, she passed away in December, and I miss her a lot. And I'd love to see her. I'd love to help her. I'd love to benefit her in some way. And earlier today, during the break, I saw an ant. But I don't know that ant. I don't love that ant. I'm not dying to benefit that ant. But maybe it's my grandmother, right? The fact that we don't recognize each other, the fact that we lose our memory, that shouldn't stop true love, right? Like, this is another interesting thing. Unconditional love can only be unconditional if it's universal. Otherwise, it's conditional. I'll love you as long as I remember who you are. In any case, so this first step is to cultivate the recognition that everyone has been your mother. And the second step, which tends to be by far and away the hardest one for Westerners, is to cultivate a remembrance of their kindness. Is to think about the kindness of the mother. Now remember, kindness does not talk about motivation. Kindness talks about helpfulness, helpful actions. And anybody who is alive as an adult, however horrible you may feel like your mom was to you, and I'm truly, truly sorry if she was, there are a lot of things that the mom had to do for us to be here. You know, we can divide that into the biological mother and the whoever raised us. man, woman, non-binary, whoever. It can fit under the category of mother here, but both, it might have been the same person. The biological mother might have been the caregiver. It might have been different people, but both of them had to do tremendous amounts of things for us to be here. Human babies do not survive on their own. And I forget which teacher it is that says that if you were to put out an ad that says, you know, wanted person to feed me, make sure that the house is well stocked, clean me, clothe me, purchase all the things for me, drive me places, make sure that my healthcare is taken care of, make sure that I get a good education, make sure that I don't stumble into the fire and fall off the roof. For 18 years, remuneration is $0.00. Don't sit by the phone waiting for people to call. You know, the fact that somebody did that for you is tremendous. And you can, so the point here is to meditate on that, to really think about that. Then the third one is to cultivate the wish to repay the kindness. It's gratitude. It's just by thinking about all the things that they did to then let yourself think, I really want to do something back for them. I really want to repay that. At this point, when you do that, at this point, you'll develop heartwarming love. Heartwarming love will automatically arise. That's the one that is always so happy to see people. You'll recognize them as having been so kind to you, so kind to you. You'll want to help them, and you'll see them as beautiful, appealing, attractive. Then on the basis of that, you cultivate great love. So you think about all beings, all limited beings, through that light, through that lens of how much they've helped you, of how kind they've been to you, and of wanting to repay that kindness. And then through that, you think, I really want to lead them to enlightenment. I want them to be free of any limitations. And with that as a basis, then you cultivate great compassion. You know, what you do is you shift your focus to, like, so your focus then is on the aspiration of what you want them to have, that happiness you want them to have. Then you shift your focus to the suffering that they currently have. And then you feel an overwhelming compassion, a genuine compassion. It's not artificial. It's like in the same way that when you're exhausted, you want to sit down. In the same way, when you think about their suffering, you want to relieve it. You have great compassion. Then on the basis of that, you can cultivate the wholehearted resolve, the, I used a different word earlier. Sorry, I just want to use the same word so it's not too confusing. Sorry. Exceptional resolve. That's what I called it earlier. The exceptional resolve. And the exceptional resolve of saying, I take responsibility. I will make this happen. And I'm not going to wait to see if others are willing to help or not. I'll do it. If others are helping and they abandon the project, I'll keep going, but I will make this happen. And then on the basis of that, you cultivate bodhicitta. You know, on the basis of that, then you think about how to do this, how on earth to do this. I'm going to do this no matter what, but how? And then you realize that the only way is for them to become enlightened. And the only way for you to do that is for you to become enlightened yourself. because you need that great enlightening compassion of a Buddha that is based on knowing exactly what it is that people need, right? In exactly 0 minutes and 0 seconds, I'll tell you the 5-step method for exchanging self and others really quickly. This is the other type, and you can learn more about this anywhere where fine and trustworthy Buddhist books are sold, right? It's in the Lamrim Chenmo, Buddhist talks about it everywhere. But there are 5 steps. The first is called equalizing self with others, and this is equanimity again. It's the same thing, just really quickly. Lama Tsongkhapa says, in this context, says to start by overcoming 2 obstacles that exist to equalizing self and others. One is, this is the way he says it: among all the people who are happy or suffering, you make a categorical differentiation into yourself and others, making them as different as blue and yellow. Then you accomplish your happiness and remove your suffering because you think of them as mine, and you neglect others' happiness and suffering because you think of them as belonging to others. Lama Tsongkhapa gives detailed instructions on how we can overcome that mistake of thinking there's that categorical differentiation. The second obstacle is thinking, I will not make an effort to dispel other suffering because other suffering does not harm me. And that's based on a mistake also. Lama Tsongkhapa explains how to overcome that mistake. That's the first step. Then the second step is to think about all of the disadvantages of self-cherishing. Self-cherishing means to think that, self-cherishing means this: when you're stuck in traffic with 10,000 other cars, you think, why is this happening to me? Right? If you're in traffic with 10,000 other cars, it's not happening to just you. But that's what we think, right? So you think about all of the disadvantages of self-cherishing. And Lama Tsongkhapa explains all of them, but being self-cherishing is the door to all suffering, is one of them. Then you think about all of the advantages of cherishing others. And just about anything good that you could possibly come up with, anything good that you could imagine or visualize, comes from cherishing others. It's just the nature of the universe. It's just the fact that cherishing others is in line with reality in a way that self-cherishing isn't. Then you do the actual thought of exchanging self with others, which is that, instead of drawing this line and saying, let me first look out for everybody inside this circle, you practice reversing that by thinking, here's this random line, let me first look out for everybody outside this circle. Let me look out for infinity minus 1 beings before I look out for 1 being, right? And then the 5th step is to practice the meditation on giving and taking, which is in Tibetan called Tonglen, where it's a beautiful, beautiful, extremely powerful meditation, where you build it up step by step, but basically you visualize yourself cherishing as like this black, hard shell, kind of like darkening the light in your heart. There's like, your heart is like beautifully, infinitely bright, pure light, but there's this hard, dark shell around it, which is self-cherishing, which is kind of limiting it. It's kind of enclosing it. And then you visualize all the suffering that everybody else is feeling, and you visualize that it comes out as smoke, and you breathe it in. And when you breathe it in, it goes right to your heart, and it shatters that self-cherishing. And then all of that light comes out. And when that light comes out, when you breathe out all of your happiness, and you send it to everybody who needs it. And you imagine it raining down on them like whatever it is that they most want and need. And then with the next breath, you breathe in their suffering in the form of smoke again. It shatters self-cherishing. You breathe out your love, your happiness. You're taking their suffering to destroy self-cherishing and allow your for loving kindness to shine out. And then you're breathing out that light as if it were the things that people most want and need. When you breathe in the suffering, that's cultivating compassion. When you breathe out the light, that's cultivating loving kindness or love. And if you think about an acquired taste, like something that you don't like at first, like maybe coffee or something like that. At first, if you've tasted it, it's awful. And just hearing people talk about it, like you might feel a strong aversion, right? But later, the more you become habituated to it, the more you learn to appreciate it, the more you start to taste it, it gets to a point where if you don't have it, you're upset, you're sad, you miss it, right? This reversal resulted from familiarizing your mind with a new attitude. In the same way, if you become habituated to viewing yourself as you presently view others, and to viewing others as you presently view yourself, namely with a cherishing attitude, you will exchange self for other. You can develop infinite love, infinite compassion, more than you probably have ever dreamed anybody could do. And then when you see me and I wave to you and I'm so happy, like you'll just be so overjoyed to see me. Right? So thank you all so much. Thank you for sticking around these few extra minutes. This is such a precious way for us to have spent our day today. Just wow, wow, wow. Do we have a moment to just do the closing prayers maybe? Thank you so much. See you, Shayla. So let's just say them in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Anjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Beloved teacher, leading your students toward wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path, you are the unequaled guide. Please live a long, stable life. Thank you all so much. I won't keep you any longer. Try to practice a little bit, just a little bit. Like just bring it, like shine one corner of the world, as they say, right? Thank you. Please be well.
Thank you, Gus.